Hey everybody, happy Monday. Welcome to another work week here. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon and sitting in for Alan Schimmel, and welcome to a brand new edition of TechStrong TV. We have an amazing lineup of interviews for you today. Lots of great folks on the show. We start with a couple interviews that Alan did. The first one with Manoj Nair from Metallic. Metallic is the Commvault offering that is making a huge impact on delivering cloud security to companies. And so Manoj and Alan talk about what's happening with Metallic, what's happening in the cloud security space in general, and really discuss the market at large. A good discussion, worth checking out. Then Alan also has a conversation with Max Bruner from Zendesk. They talk about Zendesk's inclusion in the Unity partner program. Unity is a real-time development platform, and the combination of Zendesk and Unity together is really going to have an impact on development as we know it. Zendesk is bringing the mobile app development support to the Unity platform. So good stuff, worth checking out. After that, we have our monthly installment of GitLab's The Lab. Brendan O'Leary comes on and he has a discussion with Niazi Erdogan, who is a senior DevOps engineer at Roche. They have an interesting discussion, definitely another one worth checking out. Then in our Something Old segment this week, we have Gary Berman's Cyber Hero Adventures show. This one is on the topic of cryptocurrency, and that is definitely a timely topic. He speaks with Paul Lee, who is the CISO at a company called Uphold, and they talk about cryptocurrency and what's happening in the space in general, and some of the danger signs for businesses as they, perhaps become cryptocurrency victims themselves. Let's see. After that, we've got, I come on for a news update that I do with every episode. So check out that. And then after that, I have a conversation with Brian Rozek, who is with Optiv Security. He and I discuss how the COVID-19 and the work from home transition have dramatically increased the risk of insider threats. And, insider threats, obviously, for many organizations really wasn't something that was on their radar when they sent all of their employees home at the beginning of the pandemic, but it's actually the risk of insider threats has increased dramatically since COVID began, and we're talking about what that means for businesses and how they can help defend themselves against insider threats, especially as more organizations decide to work remotely full-time all the time. After that, I talked with Jerry Ray. He and I speak about what's been happening, what happened last week with the Capitol insurrection at the Capitol building, and really what that means for cybersecurity at the federal government level, because apparently during the raid on the Capitol, there were some documents and devices that were stolen by the rioters. And we have no idea at this point what that actually means, what was actually stolen, and what information was on those devices. So we're going to be talking a bit about that, about what the fallout might be from that, not just with the data itself, but perhaps changes in cybersecurity policy at a national level. So please definitely check that out, that conversation that I have out with Jerry Ray. Then I do the webinars preview. As always, I let you know about 3 webinars that we have coming up that I think are worth your time and taking a look at the webinars. And then after that, we've got Mitch Ashley, as always, doing his Analyst Corner. He speaks with Rocket Software's Tim Wilging, who is the Chief Architect and Strategist, and Peter Fandel, who is a mainframe open source evangelist. And they talk with Mitch about advancements in the use of open source software with mainframe applications and tools. And we've been talking about mainframe and DevOps for a while. Mainframe and open source, not so much. So I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. They talk about some of the long-held beliefs around mainframes and really kind of pose the challenges that maybe some of those long-held beliefs really aren't true. And they also talk about how open source software is increasing in mainframe environments and just in software development environments in general. So good discussion, definitely worth checking that one out. Finally, we have an interview that Mike Vizard has with AppNeta CEO Matt Stevens. They talk about how working from home impacts network performance. That seems like a gimme, but there are a lot of factors that need to be considered in the work from home environments and networking and bandwidth considerations. So Mike and Matt kind of parse through some of the things that organizations need to consider with their work from home employees and the productivity and all of the implications surrounding that. So as I said, we've got a great lineup for you today. I hope everybody can stick around and join us, but we'll be right back after this commercial message. Hey, welcome back. First up, we've got Alan's interview with Manoj Nair from Metallic, talking about cloud security and Metallic's impact on cloud security. So let's give this one a look.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on another episode of TechStrong TV. Our guest for this episode is Manoj Nair. Manoj is with Metallic, part of the Commvault team. He's going to tell us all about that, some recent news coming out of Commvault, and just a general talk. And Manoj, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks, Alan. Really good to be here.
Absolutely. Manoj, you what a long, strange trip it's been for you, right? I like to pride myself on a lot of what I've been through over the last 30 years in tech. It's been a great journey, a great learning experience, but you've had a good journey yourself. Let's before we jump into Metallic and Commvault, let's talk a little bit about your background.
Thanks, Alan. I'm not the best talker about myself, but we'll do a short one here. I started my career as an engineer and spent some time in data management and data classification. At some point along the way, there's a spin out that I had that became part of RSA. So, spent about 7 years or so in a security company, trying all things enterprise, enterprise security analytics, and towards the end, managing all their identity products, which happened to be all SaaS, but old school SaaS, which we transformed into more cloud SaaS. So I became a cloud customer, and off the leading public clouds, learned a lot, great experience. What does innovation look like? And that was about 8 years ago, so very early in the cloud journey. Since then, I've worked with cloud companies in terms of partnering with them, building solutions that customers really need to help accelerate their cloud adoption, or make sure that they're not, getting, some of their corner cases, things like shared responsibility model. What does it mean, and what tools are required in addition to the cloud to go about that? Containers, build a startup over the last 4 years or so in the cloud management, cloud governance space, and it was all leveraging containers. So I was a customer of Kubernetes and open source and the ecosystem, and how my team went about building that. Here I am after we took that company to an exit, running and leading Metallic, which is trying to also continue in that cloud journey with a very specific lens around data and data protection.
Absolutely. I'm reminded of my own journey, the .com days, Manoj, 97, 98, 99. I helped the group start a company called Interliant, which was one of the early, what they called ASPs. So that's application service provider. So this is cloud before it's cloud, SaaS before it's SaaS, right? Because we were hosting things like PeopleSoft and Oracle and Onyx and a bunch of others. Well, Lotus Notes was the biggest thing we hosted, and trying to do that sort of in a multi-tenant capacity. There is no, VMware as we know it today, hypervisors. And yeah, it was interesting, but I look back on it as, man, it was kind of ahead of its time. Had we done that with the advent of cloud, we might have been successful. Not that, we went public and did all of that, but at the end of the day, it really wasn't successful. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about Metallic. Our audience is made up of cyber, DevOps, cloud native folks, right? So digital transformation. Some of them, a good chunk of them have heard of Metallic, but let's not assume.
Yeah.
Give us a little background.
Awesome, that's great. So Metallic is set up as a startup. It's Commvault's SaaS venture, and Commvault has been a market leader in data protection, data management, number one, just in this last MQ, but leader in the Gartner MQ for the last 9 years. And that category has been around obviously for a long time. What Metallic was set up to do is to help customers who are in the process of this whole cloud transformation, digital transformation, and how to do data protection and data management, really deliver all of those capabilities as a service. So whether it is figuring out how to protect your SaaS data, your endpoint data, your containers and Kubernetes data. And data is, really the crown jewels. It doesn't matter, what mode you're in. Alan, you and I talked about, old school SaaS and, hosting and service providers. And, customers continue in this sustained hybrid mode for a long time. So really, that's what Metallic's focus is. It's SaaS data protection. And we today are offering backup as a service for various workloads, Office 365 and endpoints, but also for enterprise workloads. So whether it's SAP HANA and SQL Server, or VMware, Hyper-V, VMware Cloud on AWS, various flavors of Kubernetes, file shares. So all of this is part of what customers need to protect in a holistic way. And they want to simplify how they do that, right? This is, transformation is messy. And how do you really make sure that at least your crown jewels are taken care of? There's peace of mind around that. Well, there's lots of different risks and concerns these days. It's not just, the COVID reality we're all living in, and we're all in, I'm in my garage, and people are all remote, and that's, causes its set of challenges. And there are other challenges. Companies are forced to transform much faster now. So that's really the mission for Metallic. How do you really think, and what does data protection mean in each scenario, it's different. For a SaaS application, it's different. For a containerized application, it's different. But how do you, take care of those differences and not let our customers worry about them? That's really our mission.
Sure. And Manoj, you're GM. We should have said that from the beginning, and I didn't. I apologize. You're GM of Metallic, right?
That's correct. So I'm the GM of Metallic, and so Metallic, is really set up to function like a startup, so that it can move fast. And we've got we have the power of Commvault behind us, and so we're able to tap into that extended team. But we have our own infrastructure team, product engineering, sales, everything. We also have a strategic partnership with Microsoft, who is a big partner of this journey with us, right? So Commvault and Microsoft, two trusted vendors coming together to help customers in this journey, and Metallic is really the vehicle in which we're trying to make that happen.
Excellent. So Manoj, with your background, your history, no one from Commvault's watching this now, so don't worry. But how is it kind of operating as you said, a startup, operating as a startup within this, monolithic kind of, I don't know if monolithic's the right word, but within this, kind of established big company, enterprise? Right?
No, great question, Alan. It's one of the reasons I came in here, right? I was a CEO of a startup, and as I was thinking of what to do next, the idea of a company that has really been a market leader for 20 years, in the space, being brave enough and bold enough to transform itself. I'm sure read the book. I'm a big fan, Clayton Christensen and Innovator's Dilemma. And Commvault was, ahead of being able to catch this trend and say, hey, you know what? We need a way where customers have a choice. And that choice is really about, how can they get a different model that they might want for delivering the same capabilities in IP, but also customized. What does different mean? What does cloud native data protection really mean? And so, other companies have done it. Some have done it better than others. And, with the progress we have made in such a rapid time, that bold bet that was made, I think 18 months or so ago, when this vision of Metallic was conceived, is really, proving out to be the right way to go and execute really fast in a market that, especially over the last 9 months or so, has been rapidly moving to the cloud.
Fair enough. All right. So there's been a lot of news. I mean, I interviewed someone from Commvault. Time is in COVID just goes crazy. I think it was last week, but maybe it was the week before. But I interviewed some Commvault folks recently. There's been a lot of news out of Commvault in general, as well as specific to Metallic. Why don't we hit on some of those things, Manoj?
Yeah, no. So Metallic in the last year plus old now, and really rapidly evolved its offerings. Just this past quarter, we have doubled our offerings and tripled the number of countries we're in. So today, at the start of this year, we were US only. Today we're in 14, 15 countries around the world. We are in all Asia Pacific and in Australia and New Zealand. We're in 10 countries in Europe. We're in Israel. We're in US, Canada. So one is as a SaaS service, the geographic expansion is not just making the service available. It's the compliance. It's GDPR. It's regional laws. It's data residency. We are a data processor, so that has got to be done right and done in a way. So. But our customers around the globe were asking for it, and so we accelerated that global availability much faster than I would say a typical startup would do. But also the offerings, right? So we started with focus on O365 and endpoint. It was always, we have access to the Commvault IP, but we're making this a cloud-native SaaS service. So we take it, take that entire experience in SaaS that includes acquisition. How do you procure it? How do you sign up for a free trial? Can I go to a marketplace and just click and access and start backing up my data? And how easy is it? So simplicity of business model and consumption were key to us. Our O365 customer doesn't have to worry about anything. They connect their account. They never have to worry about the storage. They don't have to worry about the network egress charges and where's the infrastructure. That entire suite just gets backed up. So that is something that was not just a mid-market, but large enterprises immediately started transforming. Teams adoption. How do you protect your Teams data? O365 is not just email. So it started their endpoints post-COVID. We made the endpoint backup free, because if you imagine, you don't want your endpoints to be backed up now coming through the corporate network. Everyone's remote. So you do want it to go, direct to cloud, and we made it available. And we saw the biggest of big enterprises sign up. And one of the largest insurance companies is a great example that they had 6 months free, unlimited, but even before that was over, they just signed up and said, we need the service. Long term, this is the way to go. And so we're starting to see that enterprise traction, and with the enterprise traction is the enterprise workloads. So the doubling of those is really, very near and dear to my heart. Is this, the different paths to hybrid. And what we opened up is 3 new workloads: the Metallic, for VM and Kubernetes backup, Metallic for database backup, and Metallic for unstructured data and objects backup. And all 3 of them, all of them are backup as a service. Again, in the case of enterprise workloads, you have certain other things you think about, but they're all aimed at this journey to the cloud. And happy to double click on that. But that's been all the recent news. There's been quite a lot, and we can unpack that here in a second.
So, well, what we should do is make it easier for people at home, because you listen to you and me talk about it, but people want to digest it. Where is there somewhere on the Magic site or Metallic site that we can kind of, where this is all in one place kind of thing?
Yeah, you just go to metallic.io, and right on the website there's this on the top screen there's a video there. I would start there, and just just shows kind of these paths and journey to the cloud. But within there's lots of assets, blogs, different paths, right? You can self-select who you are and which path do you want to go and what really matters to you. There's also Microsoft.com/Metallic. So if you're more used to the Microsoft ecosystem and you're a Microsoft Azure customer, we're like a native service within Azure, so that you can start there and go down that route too.
Great. Manoj, the whole idea of launching this and running this in 2020, right, with everything that 2020 has brought us, has it helped, hurt, not really been a factor? What effect does that have?
Alan, I rarely quote Mike Tyson in an interview, especially, but
you will be the first person on our show to quote Mike Tyson. But go ahead.
2020 is like that Mike Tyson statement, right? Everyone has a great plan till they get punched in the face, and every one of us, our employees, our customers, it's been a punch in the face, right? All those great plans, we're going to go do this, that. This is how we're going to grow our business. In our case, it's about how to have a normal trajectory of growth and go from mid-market to enterprise. And, in our customers' case, we talked about some of the journeys and digital transformation having to get accelerated at the same time security. So, for Metallic, the fact that we were launched and in market, it was great for our customers, right? Now, they pulled us much faster than we would have, made some decisions, but that has been great. You want to be customer driven as a startup. You don't want to be, exploring certain things and no one cares. So people do care. It comes with a lot of pressure to move fast. And, I'm happy to say we moved fast. The team did a great job and did all kinds of things that probably wasn't conceived. If I go back and look at the roadmap for the start of the year, I don't think it said, 14 countries, 6 offerings, and almost launching something new every month was in the plans. And that's really what's happened, right? Our customers are accelerating the journey to the cloud 30% of customers have made that move just within this year of saying, I'm just going to be 100% cloud, or so that's some of the research out there. Almost everyone has a hybrid initiative, except now it's real. You gotta be, right? You are now executing on it. And so from a business perspective, it's not something you plan for, but I think the fact that we have been able to help our customers in some of these in a very unique way and actually accelerate what we can do for them, that has been great, and that's been very fulfilling.
Excellent. We mentioned a lot of the new announcements, the new capabilities, new countries that Metallic is now operating in. What other? If, I don't want you to say anything you're not supposed to say, but what other countries might we see Metallic in the near future?
Yeah, no, we continue to expand. Both in APJ and EMEA. There's more. It's funny. We thought we added 10 countries in Europe plus Israel just a month or plus ago, and of course, you get demands from countries that you're not in yet. So
it's always like that.
We're good. We're nimble at accommodating one-offs, but it's more than one-offs, right? So it's no, we got to go and make it available. So that's happening both in Asia Pacific and in Europe. So you'll see us do more there. And there's also workload requests we get. I'll tell you the number one thing that customers are really top of the mind is security and ransomware. And that, unfortunately, we're living in a time of unprecedented crisis, and the bad guys decide that this is the best time, to go accelerate.
No, they never miss an opportunity,
right,
to take advantage of a crisis.
Yeah, never let a good crisis go to waste. They read that code, they decided to do this, and so we're there. We have helped lots of customers with their ransomware requirements and making sure they're ready and their recovery, right? Our customers don't show up in the press, and we're happy about that, because they don't, they just say, hey, we have protection, we have the data, it's not being impacted, we're going to figure out how to recover. But I think that's one of the biggest trends, I would say, that how does the mindset has shifted. Previously, when I was a cloud customer 8-10 years ago, I remember the amount of investigation and analysis went into why are you running the service in the cloud? What about security? To it is more secure if I did this as an air gap copy in the cloud. Why don't you have a data copy in the cloud that is virtually air gap from your environment, so that if you ever get hit, you at least have something else. So cloud has become like the first stop in that ransomware defense, separating your data protection control plane so that backup as a service is delivered from outside your environment has now become very important. And then detection and defense in depth, and on the security side, we always talked about it. What about your containerized workloads, right? Kubernetes, and while a lot of people are still doing dev tests, we have significant acceleration in terms of enterprise adoption. This is a great opportunity to bake in protection and security. Make it easy to recover your entire environment. No provider takes care of it. In the end, the shared responsibility model means the customer is responsible for it. It doesn't matter if they use a managed Kubernetes service or they are doing their own open source version of it. You have to bake that in, and we made it easy. We made it so easy that we're saying, look, adopt Metallic for protecting your production workloads today. You get Kubernetes backup data protection for the lifetime of the subscription. So we're running that special offer over the next 6 months. Anyone who signs up for Metallic for VMs gets Kubernetes backup for free. It's cloud native. It works with AKS, EKS, OpenShift, Tanzu, all of that. And so that's part of what we're trying to do, is make it easy for the future workloads to do things right, do things that you may not have been able to do in your prior architecture.
Got it. All right. Hey, we're way over time now. Manoj, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Metallic.io, right?
Yes.
Site. Come back. We'll continue the conversation, man. Okay?
Thank you, Alan. Really enjoyed it.
All righty. Hey, this is Alan Schimmel, TechStrong TV. We're going to be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey, welcome back. Next up, we've got an interview between Alan and Max Bruner from Zendesk talking about Zendesk's inclusion in the Unity Partner Program, the real-time development platform. So let's see what they have to say.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us on another segment here for TechStrong TV. Our guest this segment is Max Bruner of Zendesk. And Max is going to tell us about some breaking news today coming out of Zendesk. Hey, Max, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hey, Alan, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you representing our team at Zendesk.
Fantastic. You know, and look, Max said the magic words when we were talking off camera. He actually watches TechStrong TV. And it's always good to have a watcher, you know, a viewer coming on the show. Max, look, our audience is, you know, fairly steeped in IT. They've heard of Zendesk, I'm sure. But, you know, Zendesk is a big company with a lot of different services, products out there. And let's, you know, for those who may not be sure, maybe those who think they are but aren't, let's review, you know, who Zendesk is. And then let's talk about what your role is at Zendesk and where you work in it.
Absolutely. So Zendesk is we define ourselves as a customer relationship management company. What that means is, in practical terms, we provide software for support, sales, customer engagement, everything that touches our customers' customers during the process of making their experiences awesome. So, as you said, Zendesk is a big company now, and we have a lot of areas internally, and I work particularly in the team that we call the mobile team of Zendesk. We are based in Dublin, and we do take care of everything that touches the mobile world. It might be software for agents, so we take care of the mobile apps that our customers' agents they use, and we also develop all the mobile SDKs for solutions our customers use to embed great customer experiences in their mobile apps, Android, iOS. And now the related to the big news we are bringing to you here today, now also on Unity, we are launching our new mobile SDK for Unity on Zendesk.
Fantastic. Let me jump into that here in a second. So you're based in Dublin?
I'm based in Dublin. I'm a lead product manager. I together with the team here, we take care of the mobile products. I'm originally an engineer. This is why I do still watch technical videos, including your channel. Some of my friends tell me that more or less 10 years ago, I made the jump to the dark side of being a product manager and not directly an engineer anymore. But we do on mobile, a great part of our mission is to provide software for engineers directly that they use our products, they implement our products. So I still feel a lot of connection with the engineering side of things, even being a product manager.
You know, I Max, first of all, never be ashamed of what you do and what you are, right? That never take away the fact that you are an engineer.
Yeah.
Right. You're an engineer doing product management. And I've seen this. Look, I've seen it. I've seen CMOs who are ashamed to say they're CMOs because they have double they have an EE and a comp sci degree from a great college, and they spent the first 10 years of their career doing engineering, and then moved over to the business side of the house. I a lot of times, and this is a pet peeve of mine, right? A lot of times we judge people based on their title today, not understanding those people didn't get there without paying their dues, without having, the cred that they need, right? If you're a product manager, there's a difference between a product manager and a program manager. A program manager, you give them a program, it's ABCD and managed ABCD. A product manager, if you can't, as I always say, talk the talk and walk the walk, you're not going to have the vision that you need to make a product that engineers are going to appreciate, right? You got to have had that experience to do it. But we'll talk about
absolutely,
that
man.
another day.
For the record, not a shame at all. I love what I do, and it's part of my history. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, and people need to give more credit to that. And of course, I had the pleasure of going to Dublin. I guess, well, before COVID, obviously, we were in Dublin. And what a great city. What a great city for tech, that whole tech area that they built up by the river there. And just really, what a great place to work. Anyway, we digress. Let's talk about the big news today, Max. What do you mentioned it involves Unity. I don't know if our whole audience is familiar with Unity. Certainly some of them are. But why don't we start with that? What's Unity and why is it important then?
Yeah, absolutely. Unity is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, gaming platform for gaming development that's out there. It has a community of 1.5 million developers that are developing and publishing their games using the platform today. And even if you take a look at mobile world, like the mobile gaming on Android and iOS, they are more than 50% of the marketing on gaming. So they are absolutely huge. I believe the engineering community really elected Unity as the gaming community really elected Unity as their preferred platform to develop games in all consoles, but especially on mobile, Android, and iOS.
Excellent. Now, so okay, we got that laid out. That's what Unity is. Huge platform, de facto standard, right, in the gaming world. What did you guys do here with Unity?
Yeah, so one of the things we take very seriously on Zendesk is two main things around this space. One is we really take very seriously the end user experience when using our products. This is the experience of our customers. So we don't want customers to be going to out-of-band channels and places, obscure places to reach their support and have their needs when dealing with customer support processes. So we try to approach everything we do in the most omni-channel aspect as possible. So if you have a problem and you are inside Facebook, you should be able to use Facebook Messenger to reach out and have support when you are dealing with a given company. And the same is true for Unity. If you are playing a game made with Unity, we really want the gamer to have that experience of support and all the customer have all his customer needs solved inside that same platform. So this is a big important part for us. So we decided to bring a new Zendesk Unity SDK for that platform. On the other side, we also have we also take a lot of care around the engineering experience we provide for our customers. And the Zendesk Unity SDK also brings a lot of improvements in that area, bringing the first ever fully native solution of SDKs for Unity customer support that allows engineers in our customers to really reach a whole another level of experience when dealing with customer support and when developing and implementing customer support processes inside their game. So it's the new product we are bringing to the market today is a approach that helps also our customers engineers, and also their customers or the end users that are using that product and are getting their customer engagement experiences to a whole another level now.
Excellent. You know, Max, we sitting here on this side of the desk, right? We see a lot of companies that, you know, create sort of these partner ecosystems. Some people using marketplaces, right? Others a more traditional kind of partner ecosystem. But the real key to, I think, a lot of the success or lack of success with these is what kind of support the parent gives to the partner in this, right? So talk to us a little bit, you know, how's it been working with Unity? What is Unity doing to try to make sure that their, you know, 1.5 million developer strong community is aware of the new Zendesk offering? How are you guys going to market together?
Yeah, this is a really interesting and awesome question, because we established this partnership with Unity some time ago. And I think the key part of that partnership, which was what Unity brings to the table, is the whole support, the technical support they give us. Through the partnership, we were able to establish this real true partnership between engineers, between the Zendesk Unity engineers building the new SDK and the Unity engineers, the ones that really build the platform, to ensure that the solution is really, really the best in class provided for the Unity platform in terms of customer support. So they helped us in a lot of aspects, and what that results is we do have a solution. We are bringing to the market a solution that is stable. It's fully native, so our customers don't need to go around lots of compatibility problems and like package management issues, everything that old Unity solutions were happening. It's also performatic and doesn't bring a lot of size to your mobile app. So it's really streamlined, and I think the best thing that the partnership brought to us was all that technical help that really ensures that our SDK is really streamlined for the Unity world right now, and also for the future, because we are working with them we worked with them and we are still working to ensure that we follow the path of the new Unity versions that are coming out regularly, and like make sure that anyone that adopts our SDK is future-proof for everything that's coming down the line without any surprises or anything like that.
Excellent. Excellent. So the announcement came out today. This is available today as well?
It is available today. We already have lots of customers using the solution because we were running an early access program that gave access to lots of customers. And this is a very interesting aspect that happened during the program. Usually an early access program, it's a place where we allow our customers to have access to our solutions a little bit ahead of the time on beta versions and these kind of things. But it's mostly for customers to evaluate the solution and start bringing us feedback. The whole partnership with Unity brought this specific product to so high a level of quality so high that customers start to release the product in production even as a beta. So we already have lots and lots of customers using that product in production as of today. The official announcement is going out today. The official production version is available as of today, but we already have lots of customers using it.
Great, good stuff. Where can people get more information?
So you should, I think the best way to have more information is just to read Zendesk website. We do have our section about embeddables there. And there you can find everything you need to try if you are a Zendesk customer, you can really straightforward, get access to everything. If you're not a Zendesk customer, you can leverage one of our trial programs and starting making use of everything. Our website is really the place to go.
Sure. So, Max, what do you do for a second act? Sort of, where does this go from here? What further sort of integrations? What else can you bring to the Unity community, you think?
Absolutely. There are two priorities that we have in our roadmap going forward. The first one is that we know the gaming space for customer support and customer relationship management is a really special place in the sense that, especially when you are talking about mobile gaming with the casual or even the hyper casual space, you do have a gigantic number of end users that are casual users and they don't pay for the products, right? So they bring revenue inside through ads and through their engagement inside the game. So because of that, a very specific need, a very strong need, it's stronger on gaming, it's the needs of self-service and deflection. So we already built the SDK with that in mind. So we do have self-service capabilities today. The end users, they can navigate Help Center, they can go through frequently asked questions, and our customers can also bring data inside Zendesk to use the Zendesk tools as automation, automated flows, and everything that Zendesk offers. But for Unity, we are really looking forward to expanding that self-service capabilities inside Unity to really cater for those specific use cases where you have lots and lots and lots of customers that only bring revenue through ads, and they need to be self-served instead of having a human agent talking to them directly. So one of the priorities is to bring that forward. And the second interesting one is that we made this initial version of the SDK. It was really tailor-made for Android and iOS. So the UI, the capabilities, they are really tailored for those two mobile platforms. But Unity is way more than that. So if a customer right now wants to use our SDK in another platforms that Unity supports, like consoles, PC, WebGL, they can do that. They can already do that. But we want to do a better job in that front and really bring customized UI and specific features for other platforms that we already support, but we don't have specific features and functionalities made for. So those are two things that the community can wait and we'll see soon.
Fantastic. Max, thanks for sharing with us this news. Keep up the great work.
Thanks a lot, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, let me reinforce the invitation for everyone to head to Zendesk website and take a look at our new product. Is like anyone can open a trial. It's totally free to test and see if it fits your needs. So please join us. It will be a pleasure.
Yeah, I look forward to the day to coming back out to Dublin soon, man.
Yeah,
it'll probably be a while, but I'll get there. All right, Max Brunner, Zendesk here. Great new Unity partnership coming out of the folks at Zendesk. Announcement today. This is Alan Schimmel on TechStrong TV. We're going to be right back with another guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Next up is GitLab's monthly installment called The Lab. Brendan O'Leary is talking with Niazi Erdogan of Roche. Let's give this conversation a listen.
Hello, friends, and welcome to The Lab, a monthly show where we look at our latest and greatest developments in software development, DevOps, and the cloud. I'm your host, Brendan O'Leary. I'm coming to you today from a relatively sunny Annapolis, Maryland, on the East Coast of the United States. For those who don't know me, I'm a developer evangelist with GitLab, which means I get to talk to amazing folks throughout the software engineering space about what it really means to get code shipped to production. Today, on our second episode ever of The Lab, I'm excited to have our first guest. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about what we talk about every month, which is the latest GitLab release. So I'm recording this on the 21st, and on tomorrow, the 22nd, GitLab 13.7 will be released. Really excited about it, excited to make it the best release ever. And one of the real big focuses of this release is in release automation and deployment flexibility. So we've got a lot of great tools in GitLab like Auto DevOps and environments and releases to help you manage your release cycle. But one really exciting thing that's coming this release is the ability to automatically roll back a deployment if a critical alert is found in production after that deployment happens. So this can really automate and give you confidence in your ability to deploy quickly while knowing that also GitLab can roll back that deployment if there's an issue. Also coming in this is the ability to see the deployment status for every environment from the environment status page. So that's really useful to understand where a certain deployment is in kind of your pipeline if you have multiple environments like a staging or a test or canary environment that things get deployed to first before they go into production fully. And finally, in this kind of area is the beta of GitLab Runner Container on Red Hat OpenShift and our certified runner operator. So we're really excited to see how this is going to help bring GitLab deployments to more tools. And we're excited for how we're working with Red Hat and OpenShift to make that happen. Another big improvement this time around is a concept of merge request reviewers. So we've always had this concept of assignees to the merge request, who's assigned to it. And you can have multiple assignees, and sometimes that ends up in kind of like a lot of back and forth. I'm going to assign it to you, and then you assign it back to me once you've reviewed it, and then we're kind of doing this MR handoff game. But in 13.7, there's the ability to say, well, who are the reviewers? Who's the reviewer or reviewers for this merge request? So we're really excited to see how folks are going to use that to make their merge request flow a lot smoother. And just two other things I want to touch on real quick, and then we'll get to our guest. First is the dependency proxy, right? We talked about this last time. We've been making a lot of improvements there. And with 13.7, we're releasing a lot of new features that can really help you use that dependency proxy to sit as a proxy in between Docker Hub and your infrastructure, whether that's CI or your production infrastructure, and get over those Docker rate limits that have been introduced by proxying those images into your own environment. So not only will that save you in rate limiting, but also save you on the bandwidth and time to download Docker images every time you're either running the CI job or deploying into production or building your own Docker images. And finally, the project creation UI. So this is maybe a small change, but I think it's really quite a great one. So there's a new UI when you create a new project that makes it really clear all the different ways that you can create a project from a template or from a template that your organization defines or one that GitLab provides. And so I'd really be interested in you trying out, go create a new project in GitLab and try out the new flow and let us know what you think. I'd love to hear from you all. But for now, we're going to hear from our guest. And so with me today is Niazi, and he is from Roche. He's a senior software engineer there. I ran into him on the internet, saw a blog that he wrote called Develop and Use Your Own Docker GitLab CI Runner. And I sent out a message and said, hey, would you like to come on the show? So Niazi, can you please introduce yourself to us and tell us where you're from, maybe a fun fact that we might not know about you already?
Hi, Brandon. So it's really great to be here with you today. I mean, on the very second episode of the show. I'm really happy to be here with you today. So I'm Niazi Erdogan. I'm from Basel, Switzerland. So I'm a software engineer at DevOps, in focusing mainly on DevOps. And I'm a big fan of GitLab. I've been using it for a long time. And I feel myself kind of proficient in that, I guess. So, and kind of a fact about me that I love to read. I literally read anything I can find. Something that is related to what I do, or something really out of my scope or out of my depth, I just start reading it. So, yeah.
That's a great hobby or skill to have in this pandemic, right? To have
exactly
things to do. Yeah. I've actually tried to, it's not necessarily my best skill or my number one go-to hobby. So I've been trying really hard to like get back into it with some audiobooks, some books I'm reading, just to make myself read more. So that's really awesome to hear. Well, thanks so much for being on the show again. And like I said, I just ran into your article. I think it was shared in our GitLab Slack a bunch of times. Folks that were really admiring what you wrote. And it really interests me because, you talked a lot about, the dependencies that underlie the software we're creating and how we're creating it, right? Like the CI, CAD pipeline that creates it. So, one of the sections is called Beware the Invisible Tools and Dependencies. Can you tell me a little bit more about, where your thought process was around that?
So let's imagine a scenario where we have a Spring Boot application, right? So we have the pipeline to do all the usual steps like building, validation, testing, and eventually deploying, right? So in the build process, or let's say in the deployment process, to be more specific, so you have to build the image first. Of course, you have to build the application itself and then build the image, and then maybe you have to execute some extra stuff, right? So that could be a shell script or a Python script or whatever that may be. So in that case, so if you want to use a simple Docker and Docker image, let's say, or as a service or as the base image of your runner, that's not going to do the job, right? So you're going to have to, depending on the needs of the external dependencies of your software or the deployment process that you have, you might have to include Python and the shell or some other scripting environment at your disposal. So in that case, you have to be very clear about the dependencies that you have in that stage, in that job specifically. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've run into that myself when I start kind of, again, I fancy myself an amateur software engineer. And I've run into that, when you start to bring things together, and this can happen me just trying to learn, or anybody trying to learn, or it can happen even in the enterprise where you have different teams bringing things together. You're right, you bring different dependencies, right? I might be building a Node app, right? Because I'm comfortable with that, but then bring some Python script in because it gets, some job done that I need done. Well, now I've got, Node and Python, right? Not necessarily always together, definitely not necessarily together in, Node Docker image, right? The official Node Docker image probably doesn't have Python in it, or maybe it does, but something like that. And so, I've run into that myself. So when do you think, what's the line, do you think, where it makes sense? Like, hey, I should build my own bespoke image that I'm then going to run my build inside. How do you make that determination, do you think?
What I think is, you should always start simple, right? So you should try to separate your jobs properly, right? You should have clear boundaries between your jobs. You shouldn't try to do several different things in a single job. That should be the goal. You should be able to separate that clearly. And when you do that, you much more easily understand, what's going to go into a single stage or single job specifically. So when you pinpoint that single step and single action that you're going to take in that job, then it all becomes clear to, what you need to include in that process. So it could be just an AWS CLI or some other tool that you're going to need, and that will be just it. So maybe you don't even have to do that, do the custom image thing that you need to do, right? So it's not always a requirement. It just comes out of necessity, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. When I found myself like adding more and more before scripts, or adding more and more, things before my my job will complete, that's when you've kind of like, hey, we need to separate these concerns. It's just like in any engineering, right? Where you want to have, you pointed it out really well, like make one job do one thing, right? Just like we would say, make one function do one thing, or make one module do one thing, right? Same idea. And so, I agree. I think that's why it's so important to apply that kind of engineering discipline to our CI pipelines and our CD pipelines, just as we would, the application ourselves. It's a really good point. And so I think that's great advice. You're a senior engineer, you're working at, a large enterprise. It's great advice for them. It aligns with me because I've been using GitLab a long time. And I'm like, yep, I've run into this before. It makes so much sense to solve it this way. Let's go to the flip side of that, though, because a lot of folks, might be brand new to GitLab CI, or in general, the concept of CI/CD, or maybe they've been doing some form of CI/CD with, a legacy tool for some time, and they're using GitLab and they're not quite sure how to get started. What do you think? How would you recommend? Like, how did you, if you can think back to when you started with GitLab CI, or just kind of recommendations you would have for someone who might be new to it, how would you recommend they get started?
Well, I believe the best way is to get started with Auto DevOps, because GitLab gives you everything you need to get started, right? From building the application, testing, validation, the review process, and the staging, and eventually even deployment. So once you enable the Auto DevOps on your application or your project, it literally gives you everything. You just need to maybe customize or tweak a little bit to get your desired result, but that thing works for most of the folks and most of the companies out there, I believe. And I recommend it to people that are new to GitLab and try to set up their application environment. So if you're kind of proficient with YAML, and if you want to explore more, and if you want to customize even more, then the GitLab CI YAML is the best way to go, because it gives you all the powerful tools that lies underneath the GitLab's core, right? So then you can customize your actions with before and after scripts and actions, and you can segue to other jobs and processes and integrate even further.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks. Yeah, no, I think it's good to keep in mind. It's tough, sometimes tough to walk that line, right? Like I always used to say that the GitLab CI YAML reference page, I love it. I bet you love it. It's like really great because I know there's something that exists. I just need to go, Command F or Control F in that page, and I'll find the thing I want.
Yep, exactly.
But sometimes that's really daunting for folks, right? Like to say, like, I don't know anything about YAML or GitLab CI, or it can be a really daunting page, though. And so I agree that kind of those steps of, hey, let it kind of do it by itself, and then look at what it's doing, and then figure out what you really need it to do.
Exactly.
I think that's a really good path. So. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that story. I've got a couple other things I want to talk about. I hope you can stick around, and we'll talk about those, get your input. But yeah, the blog again is develop and use your own Docker GitLab CI runner. We'll have a link in the show notes. And yeah, stick around and we'll talk about a couple other things. And the next thing I wanted to talk about, I think really goes to, this discussion we were having about dependencies. There's a huge hack that's happened. It's probably one of the largest cyber attacks that we've seen, at least in my memory. And it's a SolarWinds you hear sunburst hack sometimes. And it's interesting to me because, it shows us how critical CI is, right? Like sometimes you don't talk about CI and CD as part of production, but they really are, right? Anything that's going to be pushing code in production really is. And it's still kind of developing, but we know at least what happened to some extent is, somewhere along their supply chain, somewhere in SolarWinds dependencies, someone was able to inject this, this nefarious code.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, a serious problem. Is that something you've thought about before? Or like, how do you think about that software supply chain of dependencies and how critical that is?
Yeah. So, it's really important that you own your supply chain, right, as much as possible. That's not always the case. That's not always possible, but you need to own that process as much as possible. So, I mean, there are several occasions that similar attempts happened in the past, right? I remember the CCleaner in the past, right? They were able to inject some malicious code into their repository, so people basically downloaded all these malicious binaries. And this is kind of the similar case. And we're talking about 400 of the 500 Fortune companies, right? So this is really big, and people are still not fully realize the extent of it. So this is crazy, and this is happening in 2020, right? So this year is already a crazy year. So, I mean, for enterprises, I mean, I've been living in an enterprise world for a while now. So it's really critical to own the supply chain as much as possible. If you have these external dependencies, then you basically have a bottleneck or have a vulnerability that is like a sitting duck that is waiting to be hacked at some point, right? So,
yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you think about, again, I do a lot of, do a decent amount. Most of the time I spend is in JavaScript, and like JavaScript is where we see this huge explosion of, it's great, right? NPM is great, but you have this, huge explosion of dependencies. We saw that GitHub put out their State of the Octaverse report, and we showed the growing number of transient and direct dependencies that everyone's code has. And so, I think it's a huge vector, and it's kind of one we've always known was there, but like, there's not a lot of great solutions for if someone's really, really motivated, right? It's just you have to kind of have this security in depth of like, first of all, if there's a known vulnerability, you've got to get it patched, right? That's the classic Equifax hack is, hey, there was a known vulnerability in Struts and they never patched it. And so that's key number one. And knowing where that dependency is, right? I always talk about, you want to make sure you're doing dependency scanning across all your repos, because otherwise you might not even, let's say tomorrow a CVE comes out for some open source package. If you don't know where you're using that in your enterprise, you're already behind the eight ball to try and figure out where it is. So I think that's really critical. Yeah. And then, just finally, one thing I want to talk about is, the big news just came out of the 3-week-long virtual reInvent. We're both laughing because it was long, right? Like I feel like, I don't know if you've ever been to reInvent in person.
I did.
It can be really tiring, right? Yeah, very overwhelming. Las Vegas in general is just overwhelming. Then add on top of it, all of these people and the huge event that AWS puts on.
It's something else.
it is. I figured they just made it 3 weeks so that we could all feel just as tired at the end of it, just as if we were in Vegas together. But there's some big announcements there, and just a couple I wanted to point out that I'm excited about. EC2 continues to be their central platform, right? Like, we love Kubernetes at GitLab. It's great, but I think EC2, that concept of virtual machine isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So it's great to see the new support for Mac instances. They're expensive, but it's great that they're there. I think there's a lot of use cases for those. And then a lot of new instances that give, different processor and memory. We're always expecting that, but these, Graviton instances, there are a lot of great customer stories at reInvent about folks that have saved a lot of money or made their applications a lot more efficient. And so that's really exciting. I haven't gotten enough time to really dig into them.
I mean,
it's exciting. And then, the Gp3 Volume Type for EBS. This is a huge game changer. It's 20% less expensive and more performant. It's like a no-brainer. They've said it in their blogs. I'm going to say it here. If you haven't updated, you can update in place without any downtime. If you haven't updated your GP2 volumes to GP3, right after the show, go do that. I'm signing the change order for you. It's fine. And then one of the most interesting things, I think, there's lots of other announcements around machine learning and SageMaker and a lot around the edge and all kinds of things, of course. The breadth of their product base is huge. But one of the most interesting things I saw was this concept of ECS anywhere or EKS anywhere. So this is the ability to run, EKS in your data center. That kind of is to be expected, I think, right? Google has a similar product called Anthos that allows you to run GKE clusters within your own data center. But to me, ECS is really interesting because we know that ECS has a big market share, right? And so ECS in your own data center, I think, is probably the biggest competition. I think that folks that are really serious about getting to Kubernetes would have to consider.
Exactly.
So I'm really interested to see where that goes in the next year or year and a half. As folks
me
start
too.
Taking a look at that. Yeah. Anything else you thoughts you have on any of that, or things that I missed?
Well, all the things you said, I totally agree. EC2 is at the forefront of all the innovation and all the changes. And actually, we've been experimenting the Mac instances as our GitLab runners for some of our projects. Yeah. So just a couple of takeaways. It takes a lot of time to provision these instances for now, at least. Over time, I believe they will fix it. They will improve it. So other than that, you get the same experience as you would with any Mac provider out there. So it's really cool to see that, because we had to depend on external providers, another dependency, right? So with AWS, we're already familiar with, we're already using, so that's easy. So one other thing I've seen from the Werner's keynote, the Grafana as a service and Prometheus as a service. So those were, it's obvious, right? Let's say CloudWatch is lacking with the features and the UI and everything that you can think of. So Grafana and Prometheus has a huge market share. Everybody is running them. I personally run 2 instances of these. So, everybody is doing it. So they decided to come up with a managed service. So those are 2 of the most important takeaways I've seen recently. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And one I missed, it's a huge deal. We run a huge, number of Prometheus and Grafana instances to run GitLab.com. And so, it's what you see. AWS is what they're great at, like for better or for worse. They're really great at service wrapping. And that's, that's going to be able to be the way that they continue to expand their capabilities. And so it's really interesting to see that. We'll see how well that goes. It's actually something I gave a talk about this past year, just kind of how open source projects should understand that, because, I think, again, really excited to see how successful Prometheus and Grafana have been. And I hope that it continues to be, right? I think it will be. I think, a lot of people are fearful of the AWS, right, wrapping your service and then it's over. But I think we'll see, I would hope we'll see, both their managed product and then also the open source project behind it to continue to thrive. But it'll be interesting to see if I'm right on that.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show today. That's all I really wanted to talk about. Where can folks find you on the internet if they're looking for you, other than this article? Where should they look for you?
Well, on Twitter, they can find me under the hashtag Niazi_ERD. And the same goes for Medium if they want to check out my articles. And I also, publish articles there. And also I occasionally try to publish online courses at Udemy and O'Reilly and Pack Publishing as well. So if folks are interested in learning more about AWS and Python and other things in terms of DevOps. And just by the way, a quick note, I'm currently working on a course for GitLab actually. I started doing it before I talked to you. So I hope to release it in the coming months. After the holiday break, of course. So let's see how that goes. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'll be looking forward to it. Definitely send it along when you get it, because I'd love to share it. I'm always excited for, like I said, that new take on like learning. I think, it's really important to always be learning. And so the flip side of that for you or for I, is this, it's a concept that I can't remember who coined it, but it's teach all that you know, right? Like teach those things that you know so that folks can learn. So always excited to hear about more opportunities for that. Well, I think that's going to wrap us up for episode 2 of The Lab. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Brendan O'Leary. You can find me on Twitter at O'Leary Crew. And we'll be back next month with another exciting GitLab release. I'm sure it'll be the best release ever. And another episode of The Lab. Take care. Stay safe.
Take care. Thank you. You too.
All right, next up in our TechStrong TV segments, we've got something old. This is the Cyber Hero Adventures with Gary Berman. An oldie but a goodie. He talks with Paul Lee, CISO at Uphold, about cryptocurrency. So let's give this a listen.
Hello, and welcome to the Cyber Hero Adventures, Defenders of the Digital Universe show. Today's show focuses on answering the question, what is fact versus fiction regarding cryptocurrency? Stay tuned to find out more. I'm your host, Gary Berman. Our mission is to shine the light on the people and organizations who keep us safe online while at work, home, and school, and to serve as a business-to-business networking platform for the cybersecurity and information technology community. We've learned that 55% of human communication is nonverbal. That's why we include a video feed, so that you have the option of seeing our guests or simply to just listen. You never know who you're going to connect with and how you'll be able to maximize opportunities resulting from hearing from our guests. As the victim of a series of cyber attacks, I've learned that the only time that you hear about hacking or cybersecurity is when the criminals win. Well, not anymore. Let's begin by saying thank you to today's special solo guest. Paul Lee is the CISO for Uphold, a currency trading platform. He hails from Liverpool in the north of England and went to university in Leeds. Now, what I'm about to say comes directly from Paul. This is not me. And I quote, he enjoys pina coladas and getting caught in the rain, as well as solving problems and making his users safer, whether they happen to like it or not. Hey, Paul, welcome to the show.
Hello, Gary. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the disclaimer. It's appreciated.
It's the first time I've ever needed a disclaimer, but it's pretty funny, and I give you credit for that.
Thanks very much.
So, Paul, our audience is about to listen and learn about, what you do. But I would like to begin by asking you why you do it. What is your mission? Tell us your origin story.
Okay. So I think potentially your users will know a book called The Cider House Rules. There's the protagonist is a guy called Homer Wells, and he's defined in the book by needing to be useful. So I've felt that need since I was pre-uni. I got into IT because of it, because that looked like it was going to be the next big enabler. The machine, and it's showing my age now, the machine and information age. IT was just the way to get stuff done. And then I went from that. I was an IT manager, then I managed other IT managers. Telecommunications, I went through there's a big telecoms provider in the UK called Energis. I used to manage systems there. Then I realized that security was the new frontier. A lot of what I did and a lot of what the nebulous stuff, let's call it the interchange between the people and the machines, it was security. That was the edge, and that was where it was most interesting to be ultimately. And so I could be useful and have an interesting life by going into security. And so I did that through kind of the finance angle. Private equity firms were just kind of the wild, wild west, and they used to buy software to manage their portfolios. And so I basically got in on a company that provided portfolio software. And I used to do the IT and then the security for those guys. So I've dealt with regulators, banks, some governments, sovereign wealth funds, all that kind of good stuff. And then, I loved all that. And then I got the opportunity again to do the, cybersecurity with an IT background in crypto, which is another new frontier. So you've got a new frontier protecting a new frontier. It was an irresistible call for me to work at Uphold. So, yeah.
I mean, that's a great origin story. And it brings to mind, there was a famous kind of quote from a gentleman, I think in the 1960s or so, when someone asked, he was a bank robber, a prolific bank robber. And someone asked him, why do you rob banks? And he famously replied, that's where the money is.
Brilliant.
is that, and now the money is all, virtual and digital. Tell us about that.
Well,
I mean, like,
exactly.
Just tell us about what is cryptocurrency.
Okay, so cryptocurrency is a digital only representation of value. It is not a commodity, but it can be treated as one. So it's not a direct. You're not buying an orange. You're not buying a face mask in COVID times. You're buying the value that is derived from the knowledge that this unique digital asset is unique, which isn't true when you're talking about the US dollar, the pound, the euro. It can be spent multiple times and it can be owned really by different people, and that's where inflation comes from. Whereas digital currencies initially, Satoshi's dream was to ensure that people knew that Bitcoin or portion of a Bitcoin that they were buying, selling, was known to be owned by one party and then sold to another. And so that ownership piece was really important because it meant that the power was put back into the end user, the ultimate owner of that, and there were no brokers. His dream was that the big banks would be not put out of business, but kind of sidelined because in this model.
Indeed. And for our audience who may not be familiar with the origin story of Satoshi, and this is an interesting fact versus fiction kind of thing, because there's this entire mythology, built around this man. I have learned.
We assume he's a man.
Well, that's the question. So what's the story?
So back in, I believe it was 2003, I could be wrong. Someone created an algorithm and started talking about it on forums. And the algorithm was public. Some algorithms they derive their security through the fact that you don't really see the algorithm. But this algorithm was put forward. It was essentially a way of creating a unit of value, a thing. It's ultimately a hash on a chain. This hash is created through work. The work being a computer calculating two hash values together. It's essentially, it's called work because it costs time and energy and computing power. And so those things have real value in the real world. And so therefore, if people are spending them, the derived product, which is our Bitcoin, has value based on that, because you can't just print them. And they use hashing functions, which is a mathematical function, which is one way. It's a one-way hashing function. In order to derive the end value without using the hashing function or going through the work, you're talking billions and billions and billions to one, the possibility that you would accidentally create a Bitcoin that would function correctly. But even if you were able to do that, you wouldn't be able to write it to the blockchain, which is ultimately the value of Satoshi's blueprint for a currency. Because what happens is we can trace all of the currencies and all of the related transactions between, not the currencies, sorry, Bitcoins, all of those related transactions all the way back to when the first Bitcoin was minted, where someone solved the puzzle, the hash comparison, the mathematical function, and then created the first Bitcoin. We can see, who owned it. It's a Bitcoin address, so it looks a bit weird to humans, but it's ultimately a long number, and that is the address of a wallet. And a wallet ultimately will belong to a person or an entity. And so then you can spend it, or you can keep it. In the industry, they call it hodling. You can hold it, but it's called hodling. So there are people who hodl and there are people who trade. So the idea is that transaction is validated by other people doing transactions on the blockchain, and so you all get a version of the blockchain. It's a kind of voting consensus algorithm. So if one person is trying to erroneously spend someone else's Bitcoin or mint a Bitcoin outside the confines of the security paradigm of the currency, it will be spotted because it won't look correct and the hash will be wrong, and other people validate that. Now, we can talk about the types of attacks that can be possible on a blockchain that that don't have so many people involved. But the more people involved, the more transactions involved, I should say, because a lot of them are machines, not all people transacting. It's a lot of automation as well. The more individual transactors on the network, the more trustable it is from a certain perspective. Because if you imagine, I'm sorry if I'm going off on one, but
no, not at all. I'm really happy that you're doing this, because it really is like layers of an onion, and
it is. No, it totally is.
And the more you kind of look into it, the more there is. I remember when I was first on my kind of Forrest Gump improbable journey into cybersecurity, I went to a cryptocurrency conference.
Which one was it?
It was in Miami, where I lived a couple of years ago, and there were some things that really just jumped out. Number one is I had this is a fact versus fiction kind of thing. This view that cryptocurrency equals Bitcoin, that there was only one type of currency. I've subsequently learned about Monero, and there were 100 booths there with this entire ecosystem, around the notion of cryptocurrency. And I had the privilege of listening and learning from some people from the Bitcoin Foundation and things like that. Can you take our audience, peel away some of these onions about the ecosystem?
Okay. To keep it fairly high level, we are a trading platform. And so we allow people to trade in multiple currencies, fiat currencies like dollar and pound, and then cryptocurrencies. And then there are things called stable coins. And then there are also digital commodities. Now, there's different names for these things, but ultimately you are paying for or buying the underlying value. So people are trying to sell different underlying values. So we trade, and lots of other platforms trade now in AU coins. So it's essentially gold. So somewhere in the world, gold is owned by the people who mint the coins, the digital coins, and you are essentially buying into the fact that you will own this underlying asset, this commodity. So it's like a traditional commodity, but it's digitized. And so you don't have to go through a traditional broker. You are essentially trusting the person who's issuing the currency. So there is that. There is what people call digital gold, which is Bitcoin. A lot of people refer to Bitcoin as digital gold. It's the progenitor of a lot of the thinking around cryptocurrency. And we've talked about Satoshi. We can go into loads of detail about the tech of it, but ultimately it's the immutable blockchain that's public. That's the thing. There's no obfuscation. There is no prevarication about, I'll pay you on Tuesday, I'll do this, blah blah blah. If you go into a transaction, it's there and then, and it's validated. That the reason it takes time on the blockchain is because it's validated by your peers.
Well, let me ask you about that. Forgive the interruption, but you're saying so many important things. So the question of time for transaction. If someone were to buy something using a credit card, it's microseconds. If someone tell our audience about that. What is the latency?
So the I think at one point it was about 12 minutes. That's the one that pops into my mind, but it's waxed and waned over the years. I think the crypto guys will slap me for getting this wrong, but I think 12 minutes was what sticks in my mind. So for a Bitcoin transaction, you get preliminary validation, but then people will validate your transaction is real, and then you'll get the full actual validation where the full quorum of required users or validations comes in. And so when you're performing a transaction using Bitcoin, the receiver of that transaction has to decide how long they want to wait to validate the transaction. A lot of them will essentially receive the transaction, this is online, and they'll say, so we're not talking in-person transactions here, which is also possible because there's a lot of crypto debit cards now. The receiver, the merchant, will receive the transaction and they'll essentially validate the order and say, brilliant, we've got your payment. we'll deliver on blah blah blah, and they'll act in good faith. Now, something that's a little bit different than with credit cards, because the risk is taken on by the credit card provider ultimately from the merchant's perspective. And so if there is some kind of fraud going on, etc., it's between, it's either between the merchant and the card provider, or the card provider and the end user.
Right.
But with Bitcoin, there's no it's meant to be a point-to-point transaction. So what happens is the merchant will essentially in good faith continue, but then you might get an email 12 minutes later and say, actually, something went wrong with this transaction. Please review blah, or we've noticed this, or something like that. So that's slightly different, but the actual buying and selling experience.
I understand. So, but just to build on that, let's delve now into the notion of cybersecurity and security of transactions. Because you're a CISO, and I know you are a subject matter expert on this. Going back to what I said earlier about the bank robber, saying, okay, that's where the money is. Do you think you're targeted more than traditional finance organizations by organized criminals?
Well, it's an interesting question. So organized criminals, so there is a base of knowledge around how to get round, circumvent, cheat traditional finance regulations. There's anti-money laundering regulations. There's ways of spotting that a company is being used as a shell. There's a lot of ways to stop it at the front door, and then there's other ways to detect it on the back end. We are a neonatal industry, compared to traditional finance, but
right.
It's actually harder to perform most of the grifts that you can perform in a traditional bank on the blockchain. But the lack of, in the past, the lack of tying the validation of an actual human to a Bitcoin address or a crypto address has been a problem. So we are currently as an industry catching up, because in every area that we have regulatory ability, so we're given the authority to trade by the regulator. Sorry about that. We're given the ability to trade in that jurisdiction. We have to do a background checks and IDVs when we are actually allowing people to trade.
So is the industry itself self-regulated?
So in the past, it was predominantly because the regulators didn't know how to deal with it. But we are definitely subject to greater scrutiny. So that's kind of half the answer. So the organized criminals, so we are the subject of attacks. And I can go into like a couple of examples in a bit. But
yes, can you go in? I would love to hear some examples. Okay,
so we do see fraud. We actually see something called friendly fraud, which is an exploit of traditional banking, which is a pain. So ACH in the US, a user can spend money and then claim to their bank that it was spent erroneously. The bank will not ask the user any questions, and we as the merchant will lose that money. And so ultimately what we have to do is protect ourselves using really a lot of AI, behavioral analysis. There's various clawback methods, but it's interesting because we are dealing with a lot of nuanced attacks where people will be, this is a kind of a time when the true intelligence of these criminals comes out. So Donald Trump issued $1,200 checks to everyone, taxpayers. What happened was we found that there were a lot of transactions. There were a lot of deposits of exactly $1,200.
Right.
We looked into that phenomenon, and then we started getting support cases of people saying, someone called me, talked me through registering for your application, registering on your application, and then I transferred my money. They'd been promised that it was a federal program. And if they were to bank, all of their check in this federal program, they would essentially get, double their money, inserted random incentive here. And what happened was, because they were on the phone with these people, watching them do all the ID verification, adding a bank account, They then stole their credentials, moved the money instantly, and then moved it again. And so what happens is you get these poor people who've been scammed. Luckily, transactions can be traced and are traced, and we've got a fraud team, and every reputable trading.
Why do you call it friendly? I mean, it doesn't seem very friendly to me.
Yeah, no. Well, the friendly fraud aspect is the ACH fraud I mentioned earlier, because you actually have real people who are not being defrauded. I know it is an odd name, friendly fraud. It's to differentiate it from other types of fraud, because there are lots of names for those things. But
I mean, this is incredibly interesting and complicated. So what do you consider the biggest? Yeah. What's the biggest challenge for you working in this industry?
Well, okay. You would expect that it's, dealing with the daily DOS attacks or DDoS attacks, dealing with people pretending to be legitimate customers and actually being money mules. You'd expect that it was something like that, but actually it's trying to find crypto engineers. So in answer to your question, earlier, and people who know how to, for me, talk security with regards to crypto, because there's a dearth of knowledge about some subjects, but others there's hardly any. So the situation is that you need to have very specialized knowledge, and you need to know how to write the code for the currencies, which actually, referring back to your question, there are many, there's thousands. I think there was last count, there was about 2,000 currencies that are kind of largely aware. Yeah, that I'm largely aware of.
So when you say currencies, like Bitcoins or Monero, they're 2,000? Wow.
Yeah, well, I'm sure people will scream at me saying I'm wrong even now, but that's why you think
there are more of them?
You have these initial coin offerings all the time. You get private backers who'll initially fund a project, and then it'll go, and if a trading platform will take them on. We list, I think, 62 at the moment, but some of those. So go on.
No, I mean, my brain's just firing. You're saying so many things. So ICOs, initial coin offerings. Why don't you tell our audience about that, and why are there such seemingly? Or let me say it this way: is it a valid assumption that there are very large swings in the value of these coins?
Yes, there are. So
why?
Okay, so you get initial interest. It's related to news coverage. It's also related to pump and dump scams, and sometimes those two are related. So traditional schemes were, timeshares, other things. We have our own share of those, and so you have to go to a reputable source to figure out whether a currency is worth spending money on. But ultimately, no matter how well people are educated, if they think they have a chance of being in on something that will be massive, they're willing to throw a few dollars at it. And so a lot of the speculation and a lot of the loss is to do with that. So usually it's not people losing large amounts of money on an ICO. Usually, obviously that's, there's a caveat there. It's usually, transitory speculators who will put maybe $50, but you've got lots of them and they're hoping for the best. And what will happen is someone will put a limit order on the price of, and this is getting into the trading side of it now. We don't actually offer trading facilities at the moment at this level, but we are in working on it. But on some platforms, you can put a limit order on it. So you'll say, okay, if the price reaches this amount, sell. If it reaches this amount, buy. And what will happen is they'll start, they'll tell an influencer, crypto influencer, to say something. The crypto influencer may or may not know better, and they'll be part of this, and it'll kind of drive interest in a currency through the roof. Then you have bought low, and now you're going to sell high because you're expecting it. You expect it to happen. So you'll put a limit order on, in the next 24 hours or something. You'll make sure that this.
I mean, to me, it's very interesting the fact that it's so secure double-edged sword, I think, possibly, because cyber criminals use, let me say it this way, is it valid that cyber criminals use cryptocurrency to exchange value for illicit services?
It is, but it's also true that people use shell companies and gold transferred for, certain artifacts, and it's in any financial system that will happen. But you're right. People will use cryptocurrencies to exchange value. There are tools that we use and everyone else uses, and the FBI uses and Interpol uses pretty effectively. And I'll talk about the Twitter hack in a minute. But they will use these tools to figure out. I used to call it, when I did presentations, I would call it the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon of blockchain, because you have Bitcoin wallets. Blockchain wallets, and those wallets will have a transaction connected to another wallet, connected to another wallet, connected to another wallet. And through the interactions of those wallets, you can discern risk, and you can discern intent a lot of times. Did people really mean to do this? Have we had repeated transactions? There are some, another phrase, tumblers. There are some services that will allow you to try and wash some currency using a tumbler. So it disaggregates the sender from the receiver, but they are more and more getting killed off. But you mentioned Monero, for obvious reasons. Regulators don't want anything to do with them, and so they lose their license, and they're not able to trade, and then it becomes an illegal activity, and then they get arrested. But you mentioned Monero. Monero is a privacy coin, which means that there are functions inside the coin which make it easier to conceal your identity, and it uses certain functionality that's similar to tumbling. So. But it's not generally used by commerce. There's a lot less users out there. Can I just quickly go back to the volatility you mentioned? So the volatility is more likely on a platform, on a coin that has less users and less invested value, because it's easier to create a swing. A classic one is Dogecoin. I have a bit of Doge myself, but it's just because it's a laugh and it's got a dog as its symbol, and my son likes dogs, likes the Doges. Shiba, I think the Shiba Inu.
So wait, before you go into that, are you suggesting that you are making your financial decisions based upon your liking of a dog?
Absolutely.
Because I'm not going to invest in you. Maybe I'll do your platform, but forget it.
No, absolutely no. So I've got a few Doge because I love this. My son loves these Shiba Inu dogs, and I'll ask you. Haven't you got a Zimbabwean dollar? It's great to have some of these currencies that are just random and of 1 billion Zimbabwean dollars. But sometimes
what is that worth? Today's coin?
0.002 cents. I don't.
Wow! I listen. Crazy. I live in Florida. I have some great swampland. I'd love to sell you if you're interested. But
absolutely.
No, more on a serious, on a substantive, note here. Who are your biggest users, on your platform? How do you describe that?
Yeah, we've got a bit of a cross section. One of the founders and a few of the founders' principles was that people who were not served by traditional finance need a place to be able to transact.
You mean the unbanked or the underbanked?
I was about to say the unbanked and underbanked, yes. So those people, so classic example, I don't really want to draw attention to specific countries, but there are some countries where rapid inflation, distrust in the structures, the traditional structures, and the sheer non-value and no trust in the currency has forced people to choose different ways of trying to exchange value. And we see on our platform from certain jurisdictions, people essentially buying loaves of bread, just their weekly groceries, petrol or gasoline,
Wow.
So
Is
people
that
are
with
using
a debit card? Is that some
no,
kind
well, no. What's happening is they're using their phones and they're essentially using QR codes to
Oh.
transfer using any given cryptocurrency to each other, and so they can see, oh, I've just paid you. I've got my groceries, and so it's sidestepping that traditional finance role.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's those people. There's the aforementioned hodlers, people who basically grab it and hold on to it, and then occasionally they'll transact. They'll see a new currency will come out, and they'll say, "Oh, I'll just spend a little bit more on that." But ultimately, I might want my cold storage. So there's hot storage and cold storage. Hot storage is something like Uphold. You are connected to the internet, and you are able to trade easily, and you can do stuff. But you also are subject to the risk of someone hacking your account and doing stuff that you might want. And then you've got cold storage, which usually relies on physical controls. But I particularly like, there's a Ledger Nano, but there's Trezor out there as well. But you've got a Nano device. You connect it to
a physical, like
it's a USB. Yeah, it's a little USB, and there's Bluetooth ones now. And you'll plug them in. You'll use an app to transfer, to basically give you a secure Bitcoin address. You will then go to wherever you buy your Bitcoin, and let's just say Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, but I'll say Bitcoin.
Okay.
I seem to be going
No,
towards
I mean,
that phrase.
it's how I began.
Yeah.
I've always just called it that. But, as you're talking about the user experience, how do you, decide in your role as CISO between usability and security on the app?
Yeah, I know it's tough. It's tough because you're trying to make the app easy to use. You're trying to make it as interoperable with other apps because we have a partner program. And you're also trying to make sure that the people who use it, the app, are secure. And so there's on the website, there's two sections to the security section. There's like us protecting you and you protecting you. And there's always a big debate about whether 2FA, two-factor. I just have to say this: two-factor is not an email address, everyone. Some people try and argue it is. It's a disaggregated step. And so if you've got email to reset your password, that's not a disaggregated step. That's part of your username and password combination. So your username and password, 2FA, you've got biometrics, you've got the usual slew. SMS is the most known, but has some variable flaws with it. And then you've got TOTP, which is your Google Authenticator app, which is a little bit of a pain. You need a separate app to use it. So ultimately, we have to decide what to do as a baseline. What we make all users do. Then we have to decide when we do that. Do we do it when people onboard onto the platform and we just get the pain over with? Or do we say, you know what, we're going to make it easy for you to get on the platform, and we'll do it when you want to deposit funds, or so when money's changing hands. Or do we wait until you want to move money? You can put your money on the platform, you can spend it inside our ecosystem, but then when you want to move money off, you have to authenticate yourself. Now, there's debates around usability versus security, fraud risk versus what's reasonable, what regulators require, the letter of the law versus the spirit of why it was written, etc. And so we have to change our focus, but depending on what our users need. Usually, what we want to do, especially now, we're trying to support the underbanked. So we're not talking tons of money. You have lower thresholds, and you'll say, okay, just like voting, if you're under a certain threshold, we don't require that you go through a crazy IDV scheme, which is going to, require documents you may not have, or to have them put you in danger in a certain jurisdiction. But above that, it's reasonable as a provider to ask for various levels of verification, because we're dealing with larger amounts of money and the liability is greater. So a risk-based approach is the answer to your question.
Well, that's a great answer. And so as we're kind of coming to a close here, I could listen and learn from you for...
I know, and I've realized I've half started a lot of subjects.
No, this is, I would love to have you back on at some point down the road, and we can continue to unpack this incredibly interesting and important change in the whole world. So maybe you can share with our audience a little bit about who your customers are. Are you primarily B2C, so you target consumers, or do you have business-to-business transactions, or do you deal with the government, or all of the above?
Okay, so at the moment, we are what we like to call B2B2C, but we have a large B2C. We have basically direct relationships with our users, and we also are trying to ramp up the partner program that we have, because ultimately it drives business onto our platform. And what we're fundamentally is a wallet with rules and security, and we want to make sure as many people as possible can use that. And so I would say B2B2C is the way we're designed. But because of that, end users using our app, or the web app, or the mobile app, ultimately are our customers and could be businesses themselves. So we try and treat everyone similarly. Businesses go through a lot more verification checks, obviously, but end users, similarly so. So it is a mixture.
How do you dimensionalize, Uphold? How big are you? How would you explain that? With I guess the question beneath the question is to convey a sense of confidence, and
right.
and
so
credibility.
that's fair enough. So one of the things that conveys confidence in our platform, we were one of the first, I believe the first crypto trading platform to provide a transparency page. It's been there since 2003. It's still there today. It shows that we are over 100% capitalized. So ultimately, we don't multi-spend or allow people to multi-spend. In order to transact on the platform, you've got to have the money there. If we were if something happened to our company, all the money is all there, and not other sites sometimes don't do that. So the capitalization is there. Your money is essentially safe, and we've got I think the last time I checked, it's $120 million on the platform, and that's a mixture of traditional metals, aside from the digital metals that I talked about earlier, and then we've got the fiat currencies and all those cryptocurrencies I mentioned. We've been around for a long time. We, in the space, to say a long time, 2 years is an eternity in crypto. But we're known. We've got a good presence. We take as good as we get in the Twitter sphere in terms of when people say that we're doing something wrong, we take it on board. We've got a good Trustpilot score. I don't know if people aren't aware what Trustpilot is. It's an independent agency that allows users, anyone, to complain about an entity, and the entity then has a right to reply. I happen to know that our COO and president takes an active interest in these replies, and so we're there to make sure that people aren't upset and aren't causing a Twitter storm, because we make sure that we respond and we fix things that are broken. And a lot of times, fraudsters will take advantage of that, because they'll claim that something has happened to them in order to try and force us to overlook, or maybe just kind of rush into rectifying them when they have actually, caused some problem for either other users or us as a platform. And so it's a tightrope. We invest heavily in the people on the anti-fraud side, and we've got a decent support team. So I don't know. I'd say that the Twitter Uphold Inc. @Uphold Inc. is our Twitter handle, and if you just tune into that handle, you'll see how people talk about us and to us.
Wow. Well, this has been so incredible. Let's do a series of shows. Maybe you can invite some of your colleagues, some of the thought leaders in your industry, to share their insights, to really help answer the question, cryptocurrency, fact or fiction. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to amplify your mission?
I just think that people need to try this out as an industry. there is a lot of there's a lot of problems associated in the press with it. Like I was going to mention the Twitter hack. We actually have seen that the FBI has found the people who hacked Twitter based on tracking where the money went when people fell for it. They made, how much did they make? I think it was only like $12,000. It was peanuts compared to what they could have made. But ultimately, they could tie back the entire hack, which the hack was sophisticated. The method of extracting value from the hack was very unsophisticated, and so that bit them. And so the FBI and they've basically found who did it now, or they found suspects, shall we say? And so there is. There is an entire cottage industry that's grown around detecting fraud and detecting bad behavior. And I think it's actually going to be much better and cleaner than traditional finance, because traditional finance relies, if you want to subvert traditional finance, it relies on bribery, it relies on contacts. But everything's tied to private keys, which are protected and more verifiable than your bank manager's background. I think it's a good way forward, and it's shaking up the entire industry. You can see it.
Wow, fantastic. Wow. Well, Paul, thank you so much. I have, since you mentioned your dog, reference and how motivating it was, and that I'm in the comic creation and animation business, amongst other things. So who's your favorite superhero and why? All
right. Okay, it has to be Thor, because he's got a bloody big hammer. There you go.
Indeed. Well, on that note, for more information, we'll include Paul's contact information in the show notes. And Paul, thanks so much for this incredible show. If you would like to be a guest on our show, just send an email to Gary@cyberheroescomics.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here with the Monday edition of the news headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article that takes a look at how low-code can help with API integration. For the better part of 20 years now, organizations have been using APIs to integrate their technology with another to extend functionality, add a feature set, or what have you. But not all APIs are developed the same. Despite being standardized for the most part, each API is developed just a little bit differently, which means developers often need to spend time learning about and setting up the API to work seamlessly. At the same time, organizations are asking their developers and their engineers to work faster to drive that digital innovation everyone's been talking about. Low code can help here. Bill Dorfeld theorizes that if low-code platforms decrease the API integration hurdle, more problem solvers can stitch together business utilities to create more advanced internal applications. But that means third-party APIs need to be more inclusive for citizen developers. Doing so could boost the API economy at large and enable creative solutions to flourish throughout enterprises. This is just another example of how low-code is changing the face of development as we know it. Also, we have an article on how DevOps can improve the agility of mainframe systems. We've been talking about mainframes and DevOps for some time now, but the pandemic has really shone a light on the importance of these transaction processing machines as lockdowns went into effect and every aspect of business and personal life shifted online. It's essential for organizations to ensure their mainframe can achieve peak agility to enhance profitability and improve customer experience. This article takes a look at the 4 areas of focus that for DevOps teams who want to improve mainframe agility, including KPIs, teamwork, cloud, and automation. This is a great article for any organization looking to improve the relationship between mainframe and DevOps. And speaking of mainframes, BMC has updated its portfolio of mainframe tools as part of an effort to make mainframe platforms more accessible to IT operations teams and developers. Mike Vizard takes a look at what the company is now offering in its automated mainframe intelligence solution, which embeds machine learning algorithms in mainframe platforms to automate a wide range of processes. IBM's in mainframe, or AI in mainframes. Who'd have thought? BMC believes that despite their long tenure and the rise of cloud computing, mainframes do remain relevant. Many organizations have determined that the fastest way to achieve their digital business transformation goals is by extending their mainframe applications. That's a good bet, in my opinion. Over on Container Journal, we have an article that offers some helpful tips for users of Service Mesh to prevent the technology from becoming a service mess. Haha. Service Mesh is often considered to be the North Star architecture for cloud-native applications. But while it can enhance the traffic management and security of a microservices communications and provide a complete picture of what's happening in those applications, it also can be a bear to implement and manage. This article outlines some of the steps that users can take to make the process easier. It's a good read and one worth checking out if your organization is even considering using Service Mesh. Over on Security Boulevard, Richie Jennings is at it again, parsing out the social commentary around the WhatsApp changing its T's and C's around user data. Apparently, the app is forcing users to allow it to share their data with Facebook, which owns the app, and all of Facebook's other properties, if they want to continue using the app. There are many issues surrounding its moves, not the least of which is the fact that it's illegal under GDPR, and it runs counter to the deal Facebook made with the EU to allow the company to buy WhatsApp in the first place. A lot of eyes are rolling at this one, and I'm sure we're nowhere near the end of hearing about it. And we have an article that looks at the importance of a risk register in cybersecurity efforts. A risk register is basically a centralized risk management document that includes information on potential cybersecurity risks to a project or business. They're an important project management tool that can be used to prevent, respond to, and mitigate cybersecurity attacks. This article discusses how organizations can get started with a risk register and how they can use it to keep their organizations more secure and maybe even get ahead in their cybersecurity efforts. Also, late breaking on the sites, we have news of 2 very recent acquisitions that were announced late last week. Red Hat has announced it is acquiring StackRox, and F5 has announced that it is acquiring Volterra. Both are huge moves in the DevOps and networking space, and definitely give those articles a look. Mike Vizard does a great job discussing or parsing out each of the acquisition and what it means for the market in general. So be sure to check those out as well. All right, that's all I have for today's edition of the headlines. Please check back with me tomorrow. Until then, have a great day. Stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with Brian Grozek, who is the CISO at Optiv Security. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with me today. I really appreciate your being here.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you very much for the invite. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's talk cybersecurity in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as I said offline, I'm sure this is not a conversation that you are unfamiliar with, but it seems like, and I've too have had this conversation with a lot of organizations since the start of the pandemic, and it seems like a couple a couple themes have emerged. Maybe fewer companies were actually getting their cybersecurity right pre-pandemic, so they were wholly unprepared for this one. Maybe the second one is that it was a little more difficult, maybe than they expected to actually have a cybersecurity stance that they felt really comfortable with. And there's a lot of catching up that organizations are doing now. So kind of interested in hearing from you what you're seeing in the space, where you see companies maybe having the highest level of difficulty when it comes to securing their companies and their networks in the time of pandemic, and kind of what you're seeing the industry doing as an industry to kind of help them out.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I think many organizations just were not originally designed or architected to have everybody working from home for such an extended period of time. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to be working from home during a snow day or something like that, but for months on end, think about the logistics of how do you get new employees a computer and things like that in the past they never had to think about. So they've been playing catch up, and the security teams have been playing catch up too. Our budgets and headcounts were impacted just like everybody else's, and so we were kind of playing catch up as well as shifting into that new mindset. So that's been a big challenge. The other thing is we used to have this nice separation of home and work. Now you've got home networks, you got kids doing online school, online gaming. So all of these things that I never had to worry about polluting my work environment are now fair game. So I have to think about those things and balance those as well. So that's been another challenge that, again, many didn't anticipate.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine as part of that, just the threats to the network, because it is a home network is mm-hmm. definitely not a corporate network. So they normally don't have that level of security that corporate networks do. And add on to that things like, the IoT systems, the smart home systems, the gaming devices, all these things that we're now kind of having to deal with in the corporate space as far as securing their data. But in a home network environment. So how are organizations dealing with that? Well,
you're seeing more security tools getting pushed to the endpoint. Mm-hmm. So making sure that I can't count on, network traffic flowing through a central point or a firewall. So I want to make sure that I can see what's happening on the endpoints, as well as a big push to the cloud. I mean, the cloud mm-hmm. migration stuff's been happening for years, but this certainly accelerated that activity for a lot of companies to move to the cloud. The other thing that companies have been struggling with is that human element. Yeah. So, when you're working from home, as much as we hate to say it, that sort of weakens that sense of community that I feel with my coworkers. Mm-hmm. I've heard many people saying they feel isolated or kind of out of touch, and that's hard. And when you have that feeling coupled with the anxiety of COVID and all of the social unrest that's been hitting the world and the United States, it can make people feel very uneasy, which then leads to either mistakes happening or in some cases making bad decisions. I've seen situations where if you're worried about your job, mm-hmm. That's kind of gives you that little bit of nudge. Well, maybe I should save off some of this intellectual property, or maybe I should take this client list with me if I'm getting laid off or something. So security people have to worry about that as well.
Yeah, I've heard actually that insider threats that they've kind of skyrocketed since the onset of the pandemic, and due to a number of reasons. But yeah, that's definitely something that organizations do need to consider. I've also heard the fact that people are concerned about their jobs and they're concerned about the economy, and so they're working at home and they're working incredible hours and they're just burning the candle at both ends, and they are kind of making mistakes that normally they wouldn't be because they have so many things on their mind. So organizations also, I guess, need to be mindful of ensuring that their customers actually, or their employees actually do practice some sort of work-life balance when they're working remotely, so that they don't have so many things on their mind that they let security kind of fall by the wayside.
Exactly.
But it's really hard to kind of, police your employees sometimes and tell them to, go to bed or something like that. I mean, it just seems like I don't think I would want my boss telling me, you know what, you really need to go to bed now. So, but it seems like that there's got to be, as the lines between the work and home are continually blurred, that there's going to have to be some some way for organizations to ensure that that their employees don't experience that level of burnout that helps, that will basically put their network and their data at risk.
Yep, exactly. And then you've got to watch too, as you do more monitoring and like behavioral analysis type solutions, you don't want to cross that line into being, sort of that big brother syndrome,
right?
Because then employees are like, what, don't you trust me? So it's not just a technical problem, right? You really got to work with HR, and you've got to work with, other members of the leadership team to balance that. Because, as a paranoid security guy, I want to monitor everything and I want to log everything. But at the same time, some of this is really just supervisors being in touch with their direct reports and being empathetic to that situation and doing what you can to help people out.
Yeah, well, it seems like, you kind of walk a fine line with that also when it comes to just personal privacy and being, how much do you want to be in your employee's business, basically? But not, but kind of ignoring that. It's basically a double-edged sword, because if you ignore that, then, you are your employees inadvertently could become that insider threat because of just the level of, they're not practicing due diligence in how they're, how they're working on a daily basis. But so insider threats, certainly a big attack vector, or not really an attack vector, but certainly a consideration for potential cyber threats. What are some of the other areas that you are seeing, that your company is seeing, that, from a security point of view, what do organizations kind of need to consider beyond the idea of insider threats?
Yeah, certainly, looking at, external attacks. And so making sure that you step up your security education and awareness. I mean, phishing attacks are just going crazy. You can, related to COVID, working from home, all that. So, attackers have no shortage of ways that they can craft, these types of social engineering attacks to make them sound plausible. Right. So we've really stepped up our internal education and awareness. And this, we kind of moved from, the big 1 hour long training and the multi-page newsletter to more short, regular, quick bursts of information, as well as sharing data of what we're seeing. I think it's very eye-opening. It's one thing just to talk about social engineering in general, but when you can show an employee in an actual example of an email that was sent to your company, this is what they're sending to us. I think that really gets noticed and is much more impactful.
Yeah, I think you're right. We're basically a web-based company. So when one of us gets an email, we all basically have the same email address, basically. So if you know one, you can figure out the other one. So
exactly.
We, when our C-level folks started getting emails that were very suspicious in nature to begin with, but they had the same words, same verbiage, and they had that level of urgency that a lot of these social networking phishing emails have. They shared those emails immediately and said, keep an eye out for these types of emails. You don't, they're phishing. Don't do anything. And that pretty much, stemmed that as a threat within our organizations, but for larger organizations, I don't know how how you can do that. When you've got like 3,000 people, unless you're sending out an email saying ignore this email. And then just kind of, it's like, wait, you're telling me to ignore an email that you just sent me. So it's, do organizations need to maybe do some sort of testing of their employees to see whether they fall for these social engineering, phishing attacks, or, is that something that maybe more organizations should be doing, or organizations should be doing more often, or, what are you seeing as it pertains to that user education?
Yeah, those phishing exercises and campaigns are very effective at getting employees familiar with what to look for. The other key element about that is knowing how to report it. So it's one thing if somebody gets it and they just don't fill in the forms or click the links or open the attachment, but you want people to report it, and you want them to feel confident reporting it. There's not going to be any pushback or anything like that. One of the things I really enjoy doing is when employees have turned in a particularly innovative or very, I would call it, crafty type phishing attack. We hand out gift certificates as a reward. So some of that positive reinforcement, and it's a good feeling, when somebody reports that and you can say nice job. So I think that's important. And then on the back end, we're also doing a lot of exercises and testing of our response processes, so that if something were to come in, we know that we could quickly go through and delete it from everybody's mailboxes and things like that. So we've really ramped up our testing and practicing.
Excellent. So if you send a test out to all of the employees and they fail, if even one fails, you don't share those results. I mean, you don't say like, well, Bob clicked on the email, bad Bob, don't do that, Bob. How do you do that without kind of making, employees feel really bad about or embarrassed about having fallen victim to this? Because it seems like, that's something that very easily could happen. Right. We
use it at an individual level as a teaching moment. So, if they did fall for it, we try to highlight this is what you did. Here's what you should have done. Here are some of the things that should have clued you that this was, a phishing attack. The other thing we do is we collate all the results into sort of like a department dashboard. So we kind of create a little element of competition. The finance group had this success rate, and the legal group had this success rate. And so it's more about, again, that sort of that healthy camaraderie of, can we bring the overall numbers down? And it also helps us from a standpoint of, where do we need to maybe tweak our technology configurations and maybe turn up the dial a little bit so that they're a little more sensitive on some of these incoming attacks, so that we don't just rely on people, to recognize it as a phishing attack, but it's a combination of that technical and personal touch. Okay.
All right. So we were talking earlier about the insider threats as and it's something that's actually growing. How can organizations kind of see that, that this is perhaps a problem in their organization? Are there things that they need to keep in mind, basically, maybe, I don't know, things to spot employee behavior, employee actions, things like that they can keep an eye out for?
There are a few signs, and it's difficult because, employees, again, they don't like that invasive monitoring. I know executives, sometimes it's a difficult topic because who wants to admit, one of our employees could be stealing our information. Right. That could also be looked at as a bad reflection on them because, hey, I hired this person and now they're trying to take our data. So that's a tough conversation to have. But I always try to gauge it into more of a, it's not that I don't trust you, but if the attacker takes your credentials and mimics you internally, well, that makes you look bad. So, you kind of turn it around into more of, I'm trying to protect your good name versus, I don't trust you. But there are different monitoring technologies that you can put in place, like data loss prevention and things like that, that can help highlight some of that, as well as some of the traditional administrative controls like job rotations and separation of duties and those types of things also come into play. And it's your security team also doing, random investigations and doing things like looking at infrastructure. And I really want to emphasize building a culture of it's okay to report suspicious activity. So if something looks strange or looks odd or, something happened that you didn't expect, report it and let us go and investigate it. And I'm crossing my fingers that it's a false alarm. But the key thing is we know how to investigate. We have a process for it. And so I'd rather somebody go, well, I thought that looked strange, but I didn't say anything or I didn't want to cause any trouble. So if you can build that culture where people feel confident to report it, then I think you're going to be in really good shape.
All right. So, excuse me. What do you thinking? Moving forward, do you think that insider threats are going to increase over, as we move kind of fully into this remote work reality, because so many organizations have just told their employees to not expect to come back into the office anytime soon. And, at least Microsoft, I think is one of the companies that said, at least 1 year. So, what are, do you think that's going to kind of perhaps lead to more insider threats as there's less kind of oversight, if you will, on employees in remote work environments? Or do you think that maybe this is just kind of a blip in the radar, if you will?
No, I think it's going to be something that's here to stay as more people get used to working from home. And as we start to move into more of a hired consultant kind of mentality, I think, gone are the days of somebody working at a company for 40 straight years. And so companies just need to start building their environments with the mindset that, I need to make sure that our intellectual property and our sensitive information has been identified and we're protecting that and we're upfront about it. I've been very open and honest about, the different policies and procedures that we're putting in place to protect client information so that there's no surprises for our employees. And they understand right from the get-go that it's not about we don't trust you. It's about we need to protect this information and I need your help. So I think that problem is going to continue to grow. But companies, now that they recognize that it's something they need to take serious, I think they'll start building in the right controls in place.
All right, great. Well, Brian, thanks so much for having the chat with me about insider threats and working remotely and everything that our world is now made up of. So thank you again for your time, your expertise, much appreciated.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. And boy, it's never a dull moment these days when it comes to cybersecurity. So, I'm
not sure that that's a good thing between you and me.
I could use a boring day. Let me tell you, I could certainly use 1 or 2 boring days.
I could use a boring week, boring month.
But I love this job. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy what I do. I get a lot of value and sense of accomplishment in helping our clients. And I wouldn't choose anything else in all the world. So thank you again.
That's great to hear. All right. Great. Thank you again for your time. And audience, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Jerry Ray, who is the COO of Enterprise Data Security and Encryption Business SecureAge. Jerry, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and talking with me today. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Excellent, excellent. So, interesting week we've had, huh? With the Capitol lockdown and some people call it an insurrection. Well, we'll just call it the shenanigans that happened in Washington this week. Why don't we just call it that?
Let's do that. A wonderful
Okay.
comeback home for me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was joking. I said, well, we had a good 5 days of 2021. So, but, between that and the SolarWinds hack last month, there has been a lot for cybersecurity professionals to really kind of take in. The Congress, the takeover of the Capitol was it was frightening on a number of levels, but from a cybersecurity perspective, it was certainly frightening because the folks who got in ended up taking some devices out of the Capitol building. And at this point, I don't think we really know what was on a lot of those devices. So there could be some security implications related to that. Really interested in getting your perspective on what impact do you think that, on cybersecurity this is going to have, not only on obviously the immediacy of the situation with the devices being stolen, but also kind of the long-term implications of it?
Sure. There are some really excellent observations coming out of an event that people weren't immediately equating to a risk scenario, or violence in a protected realm. No one would have ever suspected that a building as grand and sanctified as the U.S. Capitol could be breached like that. But on the side, I was doing it, you're doing it. You realize the cyber implications of having unauthorized individuals inside your facility. The minute that happens, there's no other way to look at anything digital other than being compromised. Everything is sullied. Everything's dirty. You'll be starting over in every respect. And to have come in the following day and turned on a machine and attempt to get back to business was not anywhere in the realm of reality. It's something very few people were thinking about, but now they're on the clock. The Capitol Police, who were in charge of security of cyber as well as physical security, have until the 20th. The Biden administration comes in, they've got to get back on board, they've got to get right to work. But there's a significant amount of consideration that needs to be put in place for the current profile of security of all the data, of all the network the intruders got in place. So the fact that physical security is coming back into play now. There's a lot about what cyber policies people have considered, but physical security is now going to come to the forefront. And proper cyber policy is going to take in more physical considerations than just what we've done with not attaching external devices or not introducing personal devices to a network. It's going to take on the analog of what was physical security of papers in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Lockboxes, burn bags, shredders, all of that is going to come back into play. And everything that the administration can do to be transparent here is going to help the rest of the country, whether it's individuals or organizations. They can all look at this and say, yes, I need to think about that as well. It's not likely that a mob might come into my home or into my business. However, at any point, I could have unauthorized physical access to my data. So as a long-winded way of saying, things were really, really at risk until the dust has settled and people like you are taking a deep dive in the risk that was posed by the event.
What kind of frightens me about the whole situation is we have no idea really what was taken and what data was on those devices. In that type of situation where you really just don't know, what does a company do? Or in this case, what does the federal government do? I mean, you can't just like scrap everything and start over again. So how do you kind of get back to a state of feeling secure, if you will?
Yeah, at a minimum, you will look at any of the hardware that could have been accessed and just consider that gone. That's out. Beyond that, you take a look at all of the access rights that people held, whether they were using some type of second factor to grant access or just a password or some certificate. All of that gets changed wholesale. You just assume that something was taken somewhere. There may have even been passwords written on Post-it notes stuck somewhere nearby. Everything's got to go from zero in terms of the access protocol. The data will remain as it was, but now you've got to, individual by individual, allow them back in. And you said something very interesting a moment ago. On a federal level, leaders, is that it's not just federal. They've got dual systems in almost every respect. What they've got set up as part of their federal communications and data that they're given access to, and their state systems. Certainly, they bring everything that might be connected to entirely separate state networks and data stores with them when they're in Washington, D.C. So the work is going to be lost. I mean,
that just kind of multiplied it there for me right there. It's like, oh, yikes. Well, there are even some people who are suggesting that, and this is where it gets even more frightening for me, that in addition to the Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol building and gained access, there were also there's always the possibility that there were some plants from other countries, like, maybe Russian, spies, whatever you want to call them, folks who may have gained, access to the Capitol as part of this frenzied mob that had the ability to do more than just steal devices or something like that, but could actually kind of, destroy computer networks by uploading viruses, malware, spyware, even planting the bugs and tracking systems and things like that. So I imagine that the Capitol Police have really got their work cut out for them. But it's not just police; it's the FBI. It's all these government organizations who are now getting involved. Obviously, in the private sector, to your point, we're really not going to have angry mobs. Hopefully, coming in and overtaking our businesses. But there's always that threat of not just, losing your data, but also having the data that does remain somehow being compromised by malware or some sort of, introducing some sort of vulnerability being introduced. It's easy for me to say. So, it really seems to me that, this is a call to action for organizations to really step up their cybersecurity posture, but, really understand that it's more than just, running AV on your systems. You really got to look at cybersecurity and security from all angles, especially as, we are dealing with a remote workforce these days. Are you seeing a new level of responsibility among your clients towards cybersecurity, not just with this particular latest incident, but the shift to remote work, the vulnerabilities that have kind of cropped up because of that, and then you kind of throw into the mix the SolarWinds hack earlier, last month, and the impact that that's going to have on a lot of organizations through the supply chain. Do you think that companies are now kind of standing up and saying, yeah, well, maybe we need to pay a lot more attention to our security?
Most definitely. You made a lot of tremendous observations throughout there. And I think it all ties in together. If we start back up a bit to the notion of foreign actors or agents of foreign entities, foreign governments being inside the MOM and taking that opportunistic moment to do something physical to the machines. We have parallels in the private sector. It may not be a mob, it may not be a foreign government, it could be a competitor, it could be a disgruntled employee, but people are inside your systems. And now those systems are dispersed. They're inside homes. Companies are issuing laptops for people to do the work, or they're even asking people to use their own device. And it's kind of a story in many ways that everything that took place throughout 2000 just capped off with the event of Wednesday and storming the Capitol, that we see a physical breach, and that parallel of someone being in your home, your children's friends accessing a computer. And it doesn't mean they have any type of malicious intent, but these considerations now we're finding, and to your question of, is it changing our business? Most definitely. Clients are looking at us and saying, how can this data defend itself? No longer is the question of how can we contain everything within a perimeter, within our network, have strong firewalls, other protocols for allowing access, but how can the data on an individual level withstand any type of anomaly? Something that we would have never envisioned, something that's far in that realm of distant possibilities, now is not so distant. Anything happens in our home. Anything happens at a Starbucks. And the fact that that's no longer the exception, but the norm for most employees is forcing companies to look at different tools, look at the data itself, say, what can we do to make this data somehow unique to the person who's creating or accessing it with some type of control? I'm sure you've heard zero trust. ZTNA is a very catchy type of approach right now, saying that no longer do we look at our perimeter, we look at every point of access and make sure we're confirming that person is the person who should be accessing that data. Well, that's fundamentally coming back to what me personally have kind of been preaching about the data being able to defend itself. It's like a currency that only you can spend. You've got cash in your pocket. I don't know where your pocket or where you're going to be. And that cash can be anywhere and easily stolen. However, you're the only person on the planet who can spend that. In anyone else's hand, it dissolves. And if we can have that type of analog in data, in the way we're generating and accessing things, I think we can withstand events like that happened at the Capitol.
Let's hope they don't happen again. No. But
Yes.
So do you think that the data that any data that was stolen on these devices when the Capitol was stormed, do you think that any of that data would actually present a national security risk? I mean, are we at the point where we're very much afraid that the data that's out there is going to in some way compromise us as a country?
Yeah, I don't want to be a fearmonger and add on to it, but the assumption has to be the absolute worst scenario you can imagine, that even if it was some moment of opportunity, that someone grabbed a flash drive off of a desk just for a selfie opportunity, well, there could be a later realization that there might be value in that flash drive, or there could be foreign agents who are also doing what the FBI is doing right now and reviewing every type of footage to see who was inside there and see what they might have gotten away with. There could be a price to have something sold, even if it's a prize for the person who picked it up without knowing what's inside. It could be far more meaningful to another government. And they only need one small snippet of information. I think one of the more famous snapshots was the individual in Pelosi's offices who came out with an envelope. And I believe it was addressed to another senator. But something as small as an envelope, as small as having someone's name and address in some type of correspondence, is enough now to credibly pose as another person. All of those things add up to something far more critical than we ever consider. So, physical access changes everything. And I think there's plenty of reason for people to take a deep dive into every office that was accessed, all the papers that may or may not be there. It doesn't necessarily mean just because something remains in the office that it wasn't somehow compromised.
Yeah.
Everyone was armed at a minimum with a cell phone, as well as lifted out in the pocket. I guess I am a fearmonger.
No, you're not. You're a realist.
This is a very significant threat. The levels of security clearances held by different senators. We don't know what committees everyone was a member of, what the security clearance of the people who were accessing documents were of. And I'm sure that the Capitol Police and anyone who was giving evacuation orders had standard procedures in place. To the extent possible, get things turned off, shut down, lock drawers, whatever they need to do. But still, you can only do so much. And it's not just because something is classified that it has some type of national security implication. Unclassified information that's still not generally released to the public is just as damaging.
All right. Well, I have a feeling we're going to be hearing a lot more in the days and weeks ahead about the fallout from this. But until then, Jerry, I do want to thank you for taking a couple minutes and talking with me about it. Maybe as things do kind of get back to normal, and we do get some insight into what exactly was stolen and what the implications are, maybe we can have you back and we can talk more about it.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'd like to be making comments based on actual facts rather than my own speculation. So the more we learn about it, the more I hope to offer something substantial. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed the chat with you today and look forward to chatting with you again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, until then, I do want to thank you for joining me, and also want to ask the audience to please stick around because we've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon. I'm here with the Monday edition of the Webinars Preview. As I always tell you, we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. Here are 3 that are coming up the soonest, so that hopefully we can get you guys, get it on your calendars, and you can feel free to join us. All right, the first one is happening tomorrow. Actually, all 3 of these are happening tomorrow, and they're all happening on DevOps.com. So that's easy for you, I guess, to remember. The first one is happening at 11 a.m. Eastern, as I said, on DevOps.com. It's called 5 Kubernetes Reliability Tips and Tricks to Avoid Downtime, and it's sponsored by Fairwinds. Reliability in Kubernetes can be difficult to achieve, but it equates to stability, streamlined development, and operations, not to mention a better user experience. So many factors need to be considered when building a stable and reliable Kubernetes cluster, including the possible need for application changes and changes to cluster configurations. So this webinar will offer up drop some knowledge on you for regarding setting up resource requests and limits, auto-scaling pods using a metric that represents application load, using liveness and readiness probes, and software solutions for monitoring and enforcing best practices. The second one is happening at 1 p.m. and it is called Monitoring Serverless Applications with Datadog. This webinar focuses on how Datadog's platform can help in monitoring serverless applications with AWS Lambda. And they'll talk about things such as how to set up a Twitter bot that makes API calls with Node.js, deploying serverless applications, and what observability looks like with less infrastructure. All right, last webinar is happening at 3 p.m. It is called the Role-Based Access Controls for SSH and Kubernetes, Access with Teleport, and it's sponsored by Teleport. This webinar takes a look at the Teleport technology in helping enterprises access their SSH and Kubernetes resources via role-based access controls. With Teleport, employees are able to provide granular access controls to developers based on the access they need and when they need it. This makes it possible for them to maintain secure access without getting in the way of their developers' daily operations. This webinar will demonstrate how organizations can assign access to developers and SREs across environments with Teleport through roles that are mapped from enterprises, identity providers, or SSOs. All right, guys, that's all I have for this edition of the webinar's preview. I hope you'll pardon my allergies getting in the way today, but please check back with me tomorrow. I'll have more webinars previews for you. Until then, have a great day and stay safe. Hey, welcome back. Next up, we have Mitch Ashley talking with Tim Wilgig and Peter Fandel of Rocket Software. They talk about mainframe, open source, and lots more stuff. So let's listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to be joined by a couple of great gentlemen here to talk about some interesting open source, security, mainframe, DevOps, all kinds of good things. So I'm pleased to be joined by Tim Willing, who is Chief Architect and Strategist for the Mainframe business unit with Rocket Software, and Peter Fandel, Senior Director, Product Management, Mainframe Open Source. Welcome, guys.
Hello. Thank you.
Hello. I think I might have said your name correctly, Tim. Is it Wilging? If I said that right?
Correct.
Okay, good. Would you start? I'll have you both introduce yourselves. Maybe you can also introduce the company, Tim, and then we'll have Peter do the same.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Tim Wilging. I'm as Mitch mentioned, I'm the Chief Architect and Strategist for the Mainframe business unit at Rocket. I've been with Rocket about 15 years and spent the majority of my career developing commercial solutions for the mainframe, and mostly around database tools, DB2 tools. Rocket Software has been in existence for 25 plus years, and it's a privately held company. And specifically, we do software that's not just on the mainframe, but let me talk mostly about the mainframe software. Rocket has a development partnership with IBM, and many of the solutions we develop are IBM branded, but we also have many things we're doing Rocket Direct and open source. Particularly the subject of this call is one of those things that we also sell direct or partnership with companies direct to provide that open source. And so Rocket has a long history with the mainframe, and we believe in its future and in its sort of importance, in the computing divisions across, many of the largest companies of the world.
Excellent. Great. Peter, if you would introduce yourself.
Sure. Peter Fandel again. I've been at Rocket for 19 years. The great majority of those years in engineering management, and I took over management of the open source porting team about 4 or 5 years ago, and transitioned to product management about a year ago. I manage both the open source porting portfolio as well as the Zoe portfolio, and both of those portfolios are critical components to the modernization story for the mainframe. In large part because of the huge amounts of open source that are out there that you can get them running well on ZOS, as well as attracting talent, the next generation of developers. And so that's really our focus area for open source.
Excellent. Yeah, maybe let's start, and I started my career in the mainframe too. And so I understand, kind of get where you're all coming from in the market. There's a lot of built up beliefs about mainframes and applications and whether you should think about porting or not, or replatform them, leave them alone. Probably like you, I've learned it's very costly and also fraught with danger to just go rebuilding applications, because you think you want them on a different platform. You have to have a really good reason. But open source is actually a really important part of the mainframe ecosystem. I think maybe folks don't really realize how important it is. How would you describe, how'd you guys kind of set that up to give people an idea for the role that open source is playing in the mainframe environment today?
Well, I'd start off by saying open source is an incredibly important part of IT computing. I mean, it's something early career professionals are learning. It's a huge way companies are running their business today, and rather than writing things from scratch, many are starting with open source and then augmenting existing systems with open source to modernize. And that open source, because of its collaborative nature, how it different companies and individuals contribute to that open source based on the needs of the industry. You can't separate the needs of our organizations that are running mainframes, from that open source. Open source is a critical component of running your compute division. So without it, I think the mainframe would have a big missing part in what companies need to run their business today.
I think also there's a huge cost savings associated with that, because you take any recent graduate and not so recent graduate of any comp sci program, and you ask them to start developing applications, they're going to expect to build those applications on open source building blocks. And if they're not there, your cost goes way, way up. As well, another area where open source is a must-have is DevOps, where if you want to, do you want to have a different DevOps tool chain for the mainframe than the rest of your organization, or do you want to unify that? And if you're going to unify it, it's got to be open source based.
It's a massive source of innovation, and I don't know if we're here yet, but if we aren't, we're vastly quickly reaching a point where you can't operate a company, a software team, without open source software. And if you aren't using it, I can promise you your competitors are. So take advantage of it, right? Well, let's talk a little bit about, I know Zoe is, of course, a big important part of your strategy. Break it down for us. Go into a little more detail about where the roles that open source does play a role in the software development process and operational systems of mainframes. Kind of paint that picture for our folks, our listeners.
I think there are a lot of different ways it plugs in, but the one that I hear most of the companies I talk to is precisely what Peter just said. The mainframe through many years of existence has been very waterfallish, right? Mm-hmm. So companies, because of the reliability, the security, the maintainability of the mainframe, there's a process which changes are rolled out in large batches. As companies modernize the mainframe and they start to add components to those mainframe applications that are off of the mainframe, like in the hybrid cloud, or have a web front end or a mobile app front end to a back end service or application that's running on the mainframe. They want to be able to build, test, deploy the components of that application that go across the mainframe and those different computing platforms in the same manner. And to have tools, pipeline building tools, pipeline organization tools, that have tools that build these environments, run the test, destroy these environments. They need those open source tools to run on the mainframe to be able to drive those processes in a unified manner across all the different components of that application. And so many companies today are just starting, mainframe companies are starting on this journey. Many of them are hand rolling over the years, have hand rolled sort of tools to try to have them plug in, but that can get expensive, as we're talking about. So to get that open source running on the mainframe is important for them to be able to deploy those DevOps principles and practices, in that application management life cycle process.
Very much so. Of course, Zoe fits in well with that too. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I was gonna build on what Tim said by introducing a really important distinction, and that is that there's 3 very different ways you can get open source onto the mainframe. And most of the open source we're talking about is Unix-based. And you can do it via Linux on Z, you can do it via ZCX, Docker container, or you can do it via Unix system services. And it used to be that the low-cost way of doing that was Linux on Z, and now more recently ZCX, because the porting is not much work to do because it's all automated. It's just port to the hardware, which is done by compiles on those systems. But doing it on Unix system services is a lot more time consuming if you do it manually. But the advantage, if you do port well on Unix system services, is you're close to the data. I mean, if you're running open source on Linux on Z or on ZCX, it's akin to running it on another machine on the network. You don't have direct access to the data. Everything has to pass through TCP/IP. But Unix system services is part of ZOS. And so you have direct access to all the important data in your organization that's MVS data. And that's a key distinction. That's where Rocket plays, is open source on Unix system services on ZOS. So we are close to where the data is of open source by simply compiling and linking in GCC, and it injects the ZOS specific changes directly into the binary output of the build.
Talk about how about that process. Is that something that you've been doing a while? Of course, going and changing binaries, most folks probably don't do that as a natural first thought, but it does sound like a pretty straightforward way of minimizing the kind of steps that you have to go through to get there to begin using this. You can actually do it.
Yeah, it's just, we've been working on this GCC glibc port in this manner for over 2 years. And it's just coming to fruition now, where in the first quarter, we will be releasing new versions of several of our ports that are not ported by hand. They're ported simply by building them with GCC, and we hope to have transitioned our entire portfolio by the end of 2021 to be built in this manner. And that means we no longer have to modify the source code, because upstreaming is no longer a question, an issue. And it means that we can turn around security vulnerability fixes much, much faster than we could otherwise.
It's actually, I don't mean this in a hyperbolic way or kind of playing up to you in any way, but that kind of an approach can be a pretty big game changer, because you're really asking people, it's a low lift instead of a heavy lift.
Yeah, we think so.
Port, if you will.
I've talked to many, throughout the ZOS community who believe that due to the effort of, going through these ports in the past, they felt that a better strategy was to run your open source close to the mainframe. I say close with parentheses, or on a partition of the mainframe that's running Z-Linux, because the porting effort, to get open source running on Z-Linux is minimal. And so they felt that, the version currency, the security fixes, as Peter said, and the breadth of packages available, open source packages available on ZOS proper, would always be behind. So they felt there was a better strategy, to run it on Z-Linux. We don't believe that at Rocket. We believe, as Peter said, that there are technical advantages to running that open source, both from a DevOps standpoint, but even more so from somebody who's looking to augment a legacy application, say via some Python, library that they're looking to deploy, where they've found some open source with a particular function, running that Python on ZOS and accessing the data directly, in concert with the legacy application that's running, or via some function in that modernization effort, is vastly different than running that Python in Z-Linux or on a machine off platform and reaching into the data. The latency of what you can do, trying to embed that open source sort of in the code in transaction becomes much more difficult to do. So we feel that Z customers, as they're looking to modernize, will benefit greatly from open source running on Z proper.
And as I understand, I think as you were describing it, Peter, really you're talking about at the compile process, right? That's where you're introducing GCC, glibc libraries. So that's where this process is happening, changing things in a binary to adapt it to be able to use open source. And is that pretty much it, or what else do you have to do to verify it or test it, or what are folks going to want to go through as they start to introduce this?
Once we build it, we obviously have to run it through the test suites, and we have two forms of testing. We have the built-in test suites that most open source products come with. I mean, if you go to Git or Python and you download the source code from the community, it will be the product plus a huge volume of test code, self-test code. And so we execute that test code to make sure that it performs with the same results as on a test Unix system. I think we use Ubuntu as the comparison, and we compare the results. And if there's any divergence on ZOS, then we inspect those divergences. And then in addition to that, we have a series of tests that test the ZOS specific capabilities that you want in open source. And that's mostly relating to the ASCII EBCDIC conversion, because ZOS, and including Unix system services, assumes EBCDIC as the default. Most of the data that you're dealing with is in EBCDIC. And so our philosophy in porting on Unix system services, ASCII is the default internally. We compile with ASCII. Communication between open source packages and programs is in ASCII. But when you reach to the operating system, that's where the conversion has to take place. And so we have extra test suites for all of our ports that make sure that the ASCII EBCDIC conversion is taking place correctly, both in file I/O and pipes. So that adds to our testing process. So it's not just build it and ship it. We do thoroughly test as well.
I think that's great. I'm glad you explained that too, because there certainly are some fundamental differences in the operating system and environments down to the
Sure.
character set that we're using. How about, are there any kinds of applications that are more easier to to port this way? If that's not the right way to say, it's not porting it, but understand starting to use open source this way. Are there others that are maybe a little more challenging? You might want to wait to take on that kind of an app. How would you recommend people get started?
Well, I mean, we found that porting a language is the most challenging because it just dips into every aspect of the operating system. So our conversion of the Python and Perl ports will be the last ones we release at the end of 2021. Our Python and Perl today are still the ones we're releasing are based on manual porting effort.
Okay, good. Any thoughts on that too, Tim?
I thought your question originally was like talking about a customer application they were looking to augment and add open source to. What might be easier?
That I would like to go there too. That actually was but I'm glad you mentioned, you answered it the way you did, Peter. Yeah, I'm curious from a customer perspective. Data intensive things that are ultra high security, high volume. Lots of parameters can go in deciding what kind of an application you might use first to go down this path. Any thoughts on what you'd recommend to look at to pick what app you might try this with?
There are a lot of mainframe applications that leverage CICS for online transaction processing. Mm-hmm. And Kix is a great environment to deploy open source. It's been very forward thinking in its development. to take and say a Kix applications that's written in COBOL, and say you wanted to augment that, via some modules that are written in an open source language. That's very possible, and to make that communication between, really the first thing you think about is there a runtime environment that's involved? How do I want to load that runtime environment so it doesn't load every time that transaction is moving, or it's moving from the legacy code to the modern language? If it's just a binary without a runtime environment, then you don't have those types of concerns. So thinking about that and thinking through how you're laying that out from an architectural standpoint, making sure you think through that, the speed of transitioning between legacy and open source language environments. That's probably the biggest concern, depending on what you'd like to do. But many companies have successfully done this and gone off and said, okay, we don't want to necessarily go and rewrite my 30 million lines of COBOL
in the billing system. Probably not there. That's where I would start.
But there's a new function we would like to add, that potentially goes and augments via reaching out to another system where customer data is available. You certainly can do that, and many companies have done that successfully. Again, leveraging more modern languages and having that available for that augmentation is much cheaper, much less risk involved than a total rewrite and a replatform, which is, again, even then much of your language that you've written, or much of what you've written, won't even necessarily run on a new system in the cloud. So replatforming is also very expensive or very risky, depending on, again, the number of lines of code. So anyway, I probably went too far there, but that's sort of how I think about it from an online transaction standpoint. But at batch, different again, that you might just have some data that you want to read, process, and write a new output from that batch, and augmenting there, with open source is much easier because, again, depending on the language, can it run in batch or does it require to be hosted within a web server? But even then, you can still have a batch process that alerts a web service, a web server, to now go read this file. So you can embed your open source within a WebSphere Liberty or some web server that can go and even augment batch processes that way. It's really getting the right architecture down first to say how you want to do that.
Another area is data science and machine learning. You have for the past 20 years or so, you've had academics and scientists and corporate engineers developing machine learning extensions, data science extensions, and they haven't been writing those extensions in COBOL. They've been writing it in Python, and so that's the go-to language for data science.
It does give you access to a lot of new innovation just because of the language, and as well as the platform and software stack differences. Two other areas I'd like to explore in our kind of time remaining. You mentioned DevOps and the role that open source plays in this. How does it help facilitate moving a mainframe application or developing a mainframe application now into more of a DevOps type fashion? Are there some things inherent about, because it is libraries that happen at compile time process, and there's other tools, there's Zoe and things like that can help you with interfaces and tool chains, workflows, things like that. What are your thoughts on that topic?
Go ahead, Peter. You start.
Well, I was just going to say that Git has, since we released Git, I think it's 3 years now for ZOS. I think it was our #1 download within 30 days of release. Everybody in the world is using Git now.
And it starts with Git, doesn't it?
Source code control. And so, it like I said before, it just enables you to have a unified DevOps pipeline, and that's just huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, to have all of your source code in Git, and then kick off a build process. But then thinking of the mainframe and some of its legacy components, like the parts of an application that make up the database. DB2 is very big on the mainframe, DB2 for Z. And so, to say that you can take those parts of the application that touch the tables or use the tables in DB2 and extract those and then store those in a source code management repository, because in DevOps you really want to store everything as code and represent everything in code, so changes can be tracked over time. So taking open source, taking some even commercial tooling, taking some open source scripting languages, open source to allow you to interact with a DevOps pipeline that's running off of the mainframe, that's driving the build and reaching in. DevOps is really, again, not a product. It's a culture, and it's a
process. It's a way of creating software, right? Yeah.
And so to build that DevOps pipeline using those tools, but then have the tools, the DevOps tooling and scripting and running on the mainframe to be able to interact with the mainframe. Sometimes it's a combination of open source, purchase tooling, and then hand rolling the pieces in between to fit your company's needs. And that's really not possible. Again, having the Git client, Git, for the mainframe, and a lot of the other tools there, are really important for that process.
I'm curious about the security side of this. A lot of application of air gap requirements, things like that, or the frequency or timeliness of security fixes. And I don't know if there's a lot of difference between mainframe environments versus open source. That tends to happen, of course, more transparently. Maybe what are some of the advantages, pros and cons from a security standpoint of taking this approach?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's one of the major changes that we have put in place this year with the introduction of the Rocket Open App Dev for Z solution bundle. We have switched from sort of old style, one at a time, download a tarball and FTP it, and then run through 10 steps to set environment variables and get it installed for each source tool or language. And as an example, Git, which has 4 dependencies, meant 4 or 5 downloads, then you FTP them over, then you do the 10 steps 4 or 5 times. It's like 50 way. We've switched to Conda as the system for downloading, installing, and deploying open source on ZOS. And that has made a huge difference in terms of the user experience and the ownership experience. So it's now, once you have Conda installed on your mainframe, and that takes about 30 minutes, including the download and the setup, then it's a single command to install Git and all of its dependencies from the command line. And further, Conda has this concept of a channel, which is their word for a software repository, or a repository of software you download from. And Conda supports something called a file channel as well as internet channels. And so in addition to, we have set up 2 internet channels at Rocket, one public one at anaconda.org that anybody in the world can use to download from, and a secure channel server on our network that is authenticated for our customers on support. And then additionally, you can set up a file channel, which is on your premise, which is ideal for air-gapped systems. So if you have an air-gapped mainframe, you don't want it to have a connection to the internet, you can set up a file channel, populate it with the full contents of our bundle, and then all the developers within your organization can download at will from your on-premise channel. So that's another big advantage in the area of security.
Those are some really big ones, big changes.
It is a big change. I mean, there are a lot of companies that have said the only delivery mechanism for software to my mainframe is through IBM ShopC. So, I have some feelings on that. I think that's old school thinking, as far as I'm concerned. But there's still a culture, amongst many mainframe customers that's it. I think that's change. That is changing, and to make it simple, to guarantee that it's secure, and to provide options is what Peter just went through. I think is important to help increase adoption of open source on the mainframe, and so Rocket's really leading in that area to help make that possible.
Yeah, it is culture. It is sort of tried and true. If it's not broken, don't fix it. But on the other hand, when you start to demonstrate new capabilities, new benefits, speed improvements, more security, whatever it might be, access to innovation, suddenly that becomes maybe a compelling reason to start to break down some of those traditions or barriers, or kind of think about it. Adding this as a capability. We're not talking about changing everything, right? We're talking about adding a capability to how you create software in a mainframe and expanded environment. Correct?
Yep.
Sure.
Exactly.
Good. Well, let's. Where can folks learn more about this? I don't know if you have any trials or free downloads, or you've been in beta on some things that are, GA or coming out in GA. What's the best way for folks that want to engage with you and find out more and kind of give this?
Well, I think you can Google ZOS Miniconda. You can Google Rocket Open App Dev for Z, which is the product release from September, and that will lead you to our product pages, our download page, documentation on how to install ZOS Miniconda, which is the bootstrap to get you started. There is a couple of published videos. If you look at the Open Mainframe Projects Summit from September and look for, there's a video there demonstrating a secure system for downloading and installing software on ZOS. You'll find a video there that shows how it's used.
The only thing I'd add to that is go check out zoe.org.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, absolutely. Zoe.org.
don't want to look past that, of course.
Pretty complete. Everything else Peter said. But yeah,
very
a lot
important
of good stuff. We haven't really talked much about Zoe, but yeah.
We'll have a chance to do that. We'd love to have you back, and we can delve into that. And I really would like to explore some more about this, delivery of software into production, and how do we start to evolve and expand, helping organizations consider how they might do that. So there'd be some great areas to explore further. So look forward to doing that with you. It's been a lot of fun talking. Any parting thoughts before we wrap things up here?
Just real quick, I'd encourage those, mainframe ZOS shops. If you don't have a policy for downloading and consuming open source, I encourage you to get your thought leaders together. Think about the advantages that open source will provide in your modernization efforts. Check out zoe.org, but create a policy, and not only to consume, but contribute. Get involved in the projects. It's a way to expand your employees interest in the mainframe to make that open source there available. So if you haven't done it, you really should do that.
Access to more talent, I think, as Peter was mentioning earlier, and it really is opening up new pathways as opposed to replatforming and a lot of not very attractive options sometimes that you now have because of open source. So folks definitely should consider this, look at it, get into it, get involved. Great. Well, gentlemen, it's been great talking with you, both Tim Wilging and Peter Fandel from Rocket Software. Take care, gentlemen. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hey, all right, welcome back. At our final segment today, we have Mike Vizard speaking with AppNeta CEO Matt Stevens, talking about remote work and network performance. So let's give this final interview a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Matt Stevens, who's the CEO for AppNeta. They make a network performance monitoring tool of a sorts. Matt, welcome to the show.
Michael, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here, and Happy New Year.
It seems like last year, if I think about this, everybody kind of had a fire drill. They rushed out the door, got everybody working from home, and hoped for the best. Yeah. Do you think in the second half, and maybe even going into this year, that people are taking a more structured approach to working from home, and how are they managing that or thinking that through?
Yeah, great question. We see a variety of things, honestly, from our enterprise customers. No doubt back in March of 2020, there was a mass rush to the exit, if you will. And I think that one of the things we're seeing is there's more a considered approach to exactly what you can do from home, how you can do it from home. But the thing that we see consistently is, regardless of your role, you're going to run apps, and those apps are make or break for you in your role. And those apps are only as good as the connectivity to wherever they're hosted from. And so what we're consistently hearing is, regardless of where the work is being done, whether it's work from home, work from office, it's the connectivity and the quality of that application experience that matters. And so that seems to be pretty consistent from last year to what we're hearing is going to be happening going forward into 2021.
As part of that, are developers and DevOps teams paying more attention now to how their applications perform over these extended networks, essentially? I mean, it was one thing if I had everybody on the same LAN and I could understand what they were doing, but now it feels like, people have 2, 3, 4 hops to the application. So what exactly is my challenge, and how do I get after that?
Yeah, it's super interesting. So I think to the first part of your question, I think app development teams have largely been on the ball and have recognized for a while now that where the apps are consumed are pretty far away from where they're hosted, whether that be in the corporate data center, whether that's a hybrid deployment that's leveraging some position in the data center, in some either in SaaS or public cloud, or maybe fully SaaS, fully public cloud. That part doesn't feel all that new. What's new is the impact on IT. And the IT has traditionally said, look, if I can get these applications into my infrastructure, into my remote office, into my corporate office, into my branch offices, and I can do that reliably, I'm good. As long as that office is good, everyone in that office is good. That just all blew up. Going back to March, IT used to worry about an office, and they know that if they took care of the router or the firewall or any of the associated infrastructure for that office, most of the time, generally, everybody in that office was going to be okay. And there was always exceptions to that. Now, the office has gone one-to-one. If I have a problem with Matt Stevens in his home office, I fix that problem for Matt Stevens, but I do nothing for Michael. And this is the problem for IT, is that it's just completely broken down. It's now a one-to-one problem, and IT is being forced to do triage. They're forced to fix problems repeatedly, and they're even more in the dark than ever before, because while they had some level of visibility in the in the branch office previously, and this is where AppNeta traditionally is focused to bring insight into that branch office, into the home office, they're now completely in the dark. And that's really the problem.
In effect, is not the home office now a branch office for all intents and purposes? And I've got, where I had maybe a dozen branch offices, I now have hundreds, maybe thousands?
Or tens of thousands. Yes. I mean, our customers have absolutely seen that explosion from hundreds of locations to tens of thousands of locations. And how do you make the decision? How do you possibly worry about which employee or which application or which groups of employees come first when you have situations that are happening that mean you have to look at everything? And you're absolutely right that the home office is the new branch office. And we don't know exactly what's going to happen as the pandemic starts to recede and people start to return to some form of a footprint back in the office. But one thing's for sure, the work from home is going to be here forever in some large footprint. And so being able to understand and give that agility to your employee base through IT services that allow both work from home and work from office easily is key to success in 2021.
Well, if it was me, I might rank them by their ability to fire me, but I'll, let people figure out that for themselves. But I guess the other thing, though, is like each of these application experiences is somewhat different, right? I may be going from my quote unquote remote office to the cloud. I may be going into a local data center. I may be going through my local branch office before I get there. It may be a direct connection. How do I kind of navigate all that? Because all these different apps have slightly different nuances in terms of how they use the network.
You're absolutely right. And, when you think about the apps that are most sensitive, the ones that you and I as people feel immediately, are the real-time type collaboration apps like the one we're on now. So you're doing a video conference or you're doing an audio conference. Depending which provider you use, they have a very different deployment architecture. Some will tend to route based upon geolocation. Some will do automatic routing based upon locality of reference and load. Some just say, well, you're in North America and I've got 3 different North America locations and I'm just going to pick whichever one I connect to first. It's very different based upon each provider. But as you get to the tier 1 video service providers, they will initiate the connection first, make the connection, get you signed up, and then right before the call starts, they will hand you off to the closest data center that's going to give you the best possible quality. And so to your point, the networks is a very fluid, dynamic thing. And for an end user to understand the quality they're experiencing, more importantly, IT, to help an end user when quality isn't there, it could be a really tricky thing. If you don't have the ability to actually live in the actual connection and experience it the same way the apps do, IT really doesn't stand a shot. And that's what's driving so much expansion with AppNeta with our work from home solutions, is because we live and experience the network the exact same way the applications do.
Right. And what I experience at home versus my quote unquote lake house that I'm sharing with the grandparents that, is up in the woods somewhere is going to be significantly different.
It is. And it might be shared, and your local ISP might be very different, a lake house, than an ISP in your home neighborhood. Things that happen throughout the workday versus the weekend, the interaction within your lake house. So if you're lucky enough to be in a lake house and you're by yourself, you might have a pretty good Wi-Fi signal because it's just you. All of a sudden, the weekend comes along and the house next door to you fires up their Wi-Fi connection, and for some strange reason, your Netflix performance on the weekends starts impacting that Saturday morning conference call you had with your boss, and you can't figure out why. It's because your neighbor's Wi-Fi is impinging upon your Wi-Fi. And all that's just the reality that you have to understand minute by minute, location by location, to have a prayer of consistent application performance and end user experience.
Right. I'm fighting for bandwidth with a 10-year-old myself, but he's at school during the day. But right around 3 o'clock, he shifts over to those gaming platforms, and it gets really hard to get some of that bandwidth for, a video interview like this, right?
Right. And, you add on top of that, Michael, one of the things that's super interesting, as IT has gotten more used to more of their employees working from home, of course, VPNs become a critical link, and you start to route different pieces of critical traffic over your corporate VPN back to your corporate data center. Maybe you're going to access a database, or you're going to use a sales automation tool that you only want your employees to have access to over a virtual private network. Yet you might let other portions of the employee's traffic go direct to the internet. And the experience can be very different. So you have this, to your exact example, in the morning, you come in, everything's going great. Your son comes home at 3 o'clock, your performance changes. IT gets a call from Michael saying, hey, my performance is bad. Well, is it something that changed in your environment because you have another user in your network? Is it your Wi-Fi that's changed? Did the VP load just shift because a different shift of employees have come on? The number of combinations that can contribute to a varying end user experience, it's almost uncountable. And this is where, IT is left in lurch with work from home, saying, I don't know where to turn next, except for I've got to be more proactive to support the business.
But I can see that there's suddenly a Minecraft spike happening on your home network, right? Is that what happens?
That's true. That's true.
Right. How do you think this will impact the way people build apps? Will I have to make some assumptions about the fact that the worst possible connection is going to be out there? I think developers seem to think sometimes that the network bandwidth is always going to be optimized in some shape, manner, or form. And seems to me that you might want to plan for the worst conditions.
Yeah, again, I think that application developers have largely been ahead of this. The part that I think is going to change is making smart decisions when you build applications about routing and quality of service, and maybe even the protocol you decide to use for your application. For those of us that have around networks for a long time, we tend to get a little lazy sometimes and think about things like TCP being, well, it's a guaranteed connection, and I'll just rely on TCP. That way, I know my packets will always get there. That's fine on a LAN, but when you start doing long-lived TCP connections on a wide area network, and there's resets and packet loss and resends, the end result is your packets do eventually get there in most cases because TCP does its job, but it comes at the expense sometimes of much worse application performance. And so it's those kinds of decisions that application developers are getting more network aware when they start thinking about how the app's going to get used, where's the location's going to be consumed from, what are the different options for hosting that application? Is it going to be up to an end user to build their own public cloud hosting infrastructure? Is it going to be predominantly SaaS-based? Is it going to be some hybrid? All those factors need to be considered, and I think application developers have a big task ahead of them to make sure they can cover all those well.
And it's not intuitively obvious that there's all these different backhaul choices. There are people who are backhauling traffic from a cloud through a local data center back to an end user. There are people going the other way, and I'm not quite clear when to use what. What's your sense of when do people decide how to move traffic in any given direction, and do they think about performance when they do that?
We've about 2 years ago, we saw a pretty massive uptake in customers that were starting to leverage direct internet access, or DIA, in the branches for a couple of reasons. Cost was one of them. The bigger one was performance, because they felt that if they went with a commercial ISP in the branch, they could route to the third-party, mostly SaaS-based applications and sometimes public hosted applications in public cloud. They could actually connect to that faster and get better experience than, as you're explained, backhauling through the corporate network. At the same time, it took load off the backhaul. And so things that needed to run off of that corporate MPLS all of a sudden started running better too, because there was less congestion. So there was like a double win with direct internet access. The problem was, of course, DIA, in many cases, when you use just an ISP directly, gets a little bit of wild, wild west, and you kind of get what you hope for, or hope for the best. And so a close cousin to direct internet access was SD-WAN. And you start rolling out software-defined policies in the branch and using an SD-WAN infrastructure, that allowed you to decide which applications did you want to backhaul, which ones did you want to run over your MPLS, which were you comfortable running DIA, and not only for performance, but of course for reliability. And of course, we can't forget security. There could be certain applications where you absolutely want to make sure they terminate through a certain amount of security infrastructure in your corporate data center before they move, further on down the line. And so this is where, a big uptick we're seeing in direct internet access comes into play, when people want to leverage SD-WAN, DIA together and make those intelligent decisions on when to backhaul and when to just go direct to the provider.
And I can't help but wonder, as I think that through, what is your sense of the future of VPNs? Are they going to be with us forever, or a lot of people seem unhappy with their VPNs, and the minute there's a performance issue, they turn off the VPN, which is counterproductive to security. Yeah. So how am I balancing these things, or what's the future look like?
Well, I think that's going to be very much, the beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And when it comes to security, if a given employee wants to have the luxury of working from home, and they recognize in this day of incredible threats and more sophisticated threats all the time, that if they want to step outside of the walls of security of the corporate infrastructure, that they need to take more personal responsibility. And VPNs, along with personal firewalls and other layers of security, are a pretty key step. And so, I think, one of the things you can talk about, and we do this here at AppNet, if you want to work from home, there are certain applications we just won't allow you to run those unless you're over the corporate VPN. And it's a trade-off, whether you want to have good performance and good security, or if you want to drop off the VPN, well, then you might lose access to those key applications. That does go back to an earlier question, though, which is if you're going to insist on VPN performance for security, you probably need to make sure your VPN is performing well. Otherwise, your employees are just going to revolt, and you're going to have a problem on your hands.
There you go. Well, other than personal responsibility, what's your best advice to IT people right now as you kind of look at the landscape and what should they be thinking about right now to do versus what they might have thought even 6 months ago?
I think it boils down to really the same thing that IT's always been dealing with, which is think from the perspective of an end user. It's easy sometimes for any one of us in any role to think about what's impacting us and our perspective. But when you think about the sudden change that the business went through and the business units are going through with huge portions of their employees working from home and probably remaining to work from home, IT really has to think about the perspective of how does my services that I'm providing, how are they being felt and leveraged in that remote, either that remote office or the home office. And I think that takes, in some cases, a little bit of change in perspective to make sure that I can experience the services that I'm offering from the same vantage point as an end user. It's just no longer acceptable to say, well, it's working okay in the data center, or it's working okay where I am, so, good luck. I don't think that modern leaning forward IT organizations think that way, but I think the next step is to actually always view the application and the end user experience as really the golden rule. And if that's okay, then the end users are going to give a lot more credibility to work through the tougher problems with IT.
All right, folks, you heard it here first. A little empathy, a little personal responsibility, and we'll get through this whole thing. Hey, Matt, thanks for being on the show.
Michael, thanks very much. Happy New Year.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
All right, that wraps up today's TechStrong TV broadcast. Lots of great interviews. Hope everybody was able to join us, and I hope that you're able to join us for the next live episode, which will be tomorrow. Until then, I hope everybody has a great week, or great rest of the week, but a great day today, and we will see you back here, same bat time, same bat channel tomorrow. Until then, stay safe.